Chapter 486. Therefore, the Empress Dowager made a prompt decision to retreat back to Yuhua City. When the army had arrived, they had come with a ferocious aura. There were 60,000 of them, but when they left, it was as if they were running for their lives. In just one encounter, Gongju harvested the lives of 10,000 people. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was the god of death. When he placed Gong Yimo on the bed, she felt very comfortable and continued to sleep. Gong Dai's eyes were filled with gentleness, and then he began to take off her armor. But the more he took off, the colder his eyes became. Her clothes were bleeding to varying degrees, especially her feet, which were almost soaked in blood. Seeing this, his killing intent surged. He wanted to capture the 40,000 people who had escaped and kill them all. The door was suddenly opened, and Gong Dai appeared with a murderous look on his face. Everyone present was stunned. Lo Chi and the others were on standby. Even the governor did not care about the chaos in Snow City. He personally brought a doctor to guard here, but Gong Dai's expression was not good, and they did not dare to say anything. Gong Dai naturally did not trust the people of Snow City. He ordered Lo Chi, "Go and bring Liu Ranchen here." At first, there were 300 people in their team, but Gong Dai felt uneasy, especially after knowing that the royal sister had retreated to Snow City. He even brought 200 elites to take a shortcut through the dangerous swamp and cut in from the side of the battlefield. Fortunately, they arrived in time, but there were more than 100 people left, and some of them did not know martial arts, including the miracle doctor Liu Ranchen. Therefore, Gong Dai ordered Lo Chi to bring Liu Ranchen here. Obviously, there was something urgent. Lo Chi did not dare to delay. "Yes, Your Highness. Your Highness, just now." The answer was the sound of the door closing. Lo Chi was a little embarrassed. He had not finished speaking, but he had already brought back the person that the princess wanted to save. The governor was completely ignored and felt a little awkward. Lo Chi thought for a moment and said to him, "Sir, don't worry. As long as the princess is fine, Snow City will be fine." Her words made the governor even more afraid. He could see how tired the princess was at that time, especially when she left bloody footprints on the ground with every step she took. Did that count as something bad or not? "Please tell my lord that I've brought the best doctor in the city." Lo Chi saw that the prefect was still pale despite his age, so he kindly pointed out a way for him. "If you have time to stay here, why don't you take care of the funeral in the city? If His Highness comes back to his senses and finds that Snow City is still in chaos, he will not be happy." After saying that, he used all his strength to display his Qinggong. There was no other way. The princess was injured. It was more serious than the prince himself. He had no choice but to be on guard and use his fastest speed to pick up the person. The prefect hesitated at the door. There were 2 men in black guarding the door and they looked unfriendly, so he did not dare to go in. He thought to himself, "It's better to go and clean up the mess. What if I offend His Highness by standing here?" In the room, Gong Dai really did not have the energy to pay attention to them, because after he took off all his armor, he was ready to take off her blood-stained undergarments. He took off her clothes layer by layer, leaving no room for warmth, because Gong Dai's eyes were full of murderous intent, and it was very scary. The 2 people standing outside the room felt the unusual silence, and both of them were a little nervous. There were many wounds on her body, most of them were burns, and some of them were bleeding. She looked very hideous, but none of these could compare to her feet. Her feet were almost crippled. Gong Dai looked at the pair of stockings and did not know how to take them off. Gong Yimo had been very quiet, allowing him to do whatever he wanted. Occasionally, when the fabric of her clothes was peeled off, her body would suddenly tremble, and she would let out 2 soft moans, making Gong Dai's movements even gentler. However, he really did not know where to start with her feet. But if he covered them like this, it would be even worse for the wounds, so he bit his lower lip, endured the pain, and removed the stocking. Walking out of the sea of fire looked easy. Even if she used water to pave the way, the heat of the water vapor was not inferior to the fire, so her feet were injured to such an extent. It was really difficult for her to walk from Yuhua City to Snow City. Every step was a heart-wrenching pain. Gong Dai used a pair of scissors and carefully cut open the stockings. Sure enough, the flesh was already connected to the stockings. He carefully sprinkled the top-quality wound medicine, then cut the stockings bit by bit, and tore them off bit by bit. The whole process was like walking on thin ice, causing Gong Dai's forehead to be covered in cold sweat, afraid that he would hurt her. It would definitely hurt, but Gong Yimo was really too tired. Her inner strength was exhausted, she was injured, she was exhausted, she was preparing for war, she was exhausted from running for her life, and she did not sleep for an entire night. All of these made her numb to the pain. Even if it was very painful, she could still go back to sleep after a few moans. Seeing this, Gong Dai's heart ached, and he wanted to beat her up, but how could he bear to do it? His royal sister was always like this, doing everything with all her might, not thinking about whether it would hurt or if she could do it. She must have thought that she could do it, so she pushed herself to her limit. What he did not know was that this was a habit that Gong Yimo had developed in her previous life, because on the battlefield, no one could save you, only you could save yourself. So she had never relied on anyone, there was only victory or death on the battlefield. She would definitely choose to win, although she would still die in the end. Gong Yimo thought of something painful, she was a little restless in her dreams. Her little brows were furrowed, not knowing if it was because of the pain or because of the nightmare. Gong Dai finally removed all the fragments from her feet. Looking at the pair of bloody and ghastly feet, Gong Dai did not dare to apply any more medicine. It was better to wait for Liu Ranshan to come and treat her. He only carefully wiped her feet with water, wiping away the excess bloodstains. After doing all this, he was already drenched. Damn it, he must cut the person who harmed royal sister into 8 pieces, roast them in the fire, only then could he dispel the hatred in his heart. Liu Ranshan arrived very quickly. Lo Qi was in a rush and had no choice but to offend him, so he was carried all the way here. When he landed on the ground, he was so angry that his beard stood up. Divine Dr. Liu. This is a serious matter, if anything happens to the princess. You know His Highness' temper, the princess is his reverse scale. Thinking of Gong Dai's methods, Liu Ranshan temporarily suppressed his anger, but still muttered, "This old man wants to see what kind of saint he is." He had never met Gong Yimo before, but in his thoughts, this kind of woman who was always in the limelight, had a bad character. Although there were more and more people praising her virtues, but in Liu Ranshan's heart, he felt that she should go back home to help her husband and children. The room door was opened and the smell of blood rushed in, making Liu Ranshan frown slightly. He originally thought that the princess was just lightly injured and it was because His Highness was overly concerned, so he had to help her. But from the looks of it, her injuries seemed to be rather serious. Chapter 487. Gong Dai had already covered Gong Yimo's body and only her feet were exposed. Her feet were covered in blood and it looked like she really was going to be crippled. Liu Ranshan's heart turned cold as Gong Dai's cold voice came from the other side. "Heal her or die." Gong Dai had always been polite to others, but this was the first time he had revealed such a killing intent to Liu Ranshan. Although Liu Ranshan was conceited, he also knew that Gong Ju wasn't someone he could afford to provoke. Therefore, he quickly adjusted his attitude and looked at Gong Ju's feet. It was really troublesome. She was obviously severely scalded, but she seemed to be constantly running, causing her flesh and blood to be separated. In some places, he could even see her bones. Did she not feel any pain? Gong Dai's heart ached every time he saw it. He really did not know why the royal sister was so desperate. It was like as long as she set her mind on something, she would do it even if she died. Did she not think about him? Did she not know that if anything happened to her? What would he do? Gong Ju sat on the edge of the bed and carefully held her hand. At this time, his body was still trembling slightly. As soon as he thought about what could happen to her, his heart felt as if it was being squeezed by something, and even breathing became laborious. Liu Ranshan watched from the side and became even gentler. He had been a bit disrespectful to this princess, but now it seemed like she was His Highness' treasure and he could not offend her. In her dreams, Gong Yimo felt someone apply cold ointment on her feet. The pain lessened and she let out a sigh of comfort. Her brows finally relaxed and Gong Dai's heart also relaxed. Liu Ranshan softly said, "The princess's feet are seriously injured and almost crippled. But give this old man some time and I can guarantee that the princess will recover." Gong Dai nodded. After a fierce struggle in his heart, he still pulled up Gong Yimo's blanket. See no evil. Before the snow-white skin was exposed, Liu Ranshin was shocked and quickly turned his head. If he saw something he shouldn't see, who knew if the prince would dig out his eyes? Gong Dai covered the important parts with his clothes. Even so, he didn't want Liu Ranshin to see it. However, royal sister's injuries were very serious. There were large areas of burns, and he hadn't treated this kind of injury before. Although he could tell Liu Ranshin and Liu Ranshin would naturally give him the medicine, this was related to royal sister's health, so he naturally didn't dare to be careless. It was just a glance from this old man, so he endured it. Nothing was more important than his royal sister's body, that was what he said, but his commanding tone was so cold that it could freeze a person to death. Divine Dr. Liu, royal sister is also injured, come and apply the medicine. That cold voice made Liu Ranshin's heart skip a beat. He didn't dare to turn around. From that tone, who knew if he would be silenced? So he said, if it's also burns, this old man has medicine here. Your Highness can just apply the medicine for the princess. Seeing that he was afraid, Gong Dai sighed and his attitude softened a little. Now that royal sister is seriously injured, divine doctor doesn't need to adhere to the customs. This prince will not be calculative about your offense. Since Gong Dai had already said so, Liu Ranshin didn't dare to be pretentious as he carefully turned around. He saw Gong Yimo's snow-white skin was filled with red and black burns. At first glance, it was a ghastly sight. Gong Dai shot a glance at him and he didn't dare to take another look. He lowered his head to observe the injuries before applying the medicine for Gong Yimo. But when his hand touched Gong Yimo's waist, she subconsciously shrunk back, extremely uncooperative. Gong Dai had a headache. Seeing Liu Ranshin's awkwardness, he pressed down on Gong Yimo's waist and let Liu Ranshin apply the medicine. The process of applying the medicine was very complicated. It took more than 2 hours just to apply the medicine for her feet, but when Liu Ranshin's hand touched Gong Yimo again, she shrunk back again and couldn't be pressed down. Liu Ranshin was even more embarrassed. The princess might be extremely ticklish. Her feet weren't afraid because her feet were in so much pain that she couldn't feel them. But her body was different. How could he do it? Gong Dai had no choice. After trying a few times, Gong Yimo was as slippery as a loach. Gong Dai was afraid that she would rub her wounds, so he didn't dare to move. He then instructed Liu Ranshin. Give the medicine to this prince and you can leave. Liu Ranshin felt as if he had been pardoned. He quickly gave him the medicine and told him in detail how to apply the medicine. First, apply the medicine. Then, he respectfully went out. After he went out, he felt his body lighten. He then realized that he was sweating all over. Applying medicine for the princess was really tiring work. Fortunately, he ran out. Gong Dai was also in a difficult position holding the medicine. Royal sister was extremely ticklish, but Gong Dai couldn't bear to wake her up and let her apply the medicine herself. He could only bury his head and carefully apply the medicine for her. Don't move. But how could Gong Yimo listen to him? She dodged and pouted unhappily. There were always people who wanted to tickle her. Gong Dai had no choice but to take off his coat and straddle her. Of course, he wasn't really straddling her. He was just using his legs to hold her in place, making it impossible for her to escape. As expected, she calmed down. Gong Dai let out a sigh of relief and buried his head in applying the medicine for her. Gong Yimo wanted to dodge, but her body seemed to be clamped down and she couldn't dodge at all. She felt wronged and made a crying sound with a bitter face. It was tender and soft, making Gong Dai's heart melt. He felt sour and swollen, wishing he could take her place, but he couldn't. Moreover, with royal sister making such sounds, those who didn't know would think that she was being ravaged. Not to mention anything else, the 2 young men in front of the door thought that they had heard something that was not suitable for children. They kept a straight face and pretended they hadn't heard anything. Gong Dai's forehead was covered in sweat. He felt that the person beneath him was really torturous, but he couldn't not apply the medicine, so he forced himself to harden his heart. Ignoring her resistance, he applied the medicine for her. It was a good thing that once the medicine was applied, it would quickly seep into the bottom layer of the skin. Otherwise, with how uncooperative she was, who knew how much would be rubbed off? After wasting more than 2 hours, Gong Dai was finally done applying the medicine. This feeling was more tiring than fighting a war. Gong Yimo saw that no one came to disturb her and she could sleep peacefully. Who knew that a slightly cold hand would touch her face again? She clearly wanted to avoid it, but in her daze, she seemed to feel a kind of intimate attachment. She didn't avoid it, but instead, she rubbed against his palm like a docile cat. Gong Dai's brows instantly became as gentle as water. The warmth from his palm warmed his heart as well. It even felt a little surreal. In these 3 months, they really didn't spend much time together. Gong Yimo's leg was still bleeding, but it was much better than before. Because the injury was too serious, they couldn't bandage it yet, so they could only apply the medicine first. For some reason, Gong Ju suddenly remembered the small half of the map. It was said that only the pure blood of the Snow Clan could make the veins on the map appear. Chapter 488. This matter was originally very urgent, but when he saw that Royal Sister was injured, he did not think about it at all. But now that he had calmed down, his restless heart started to boil again. If Royal Sister was not his blood relative, why should he suppress himself? Step by step, he walked towards the end of the bed. Every step he took was so soft that it was almost inaudible. He unconsciously held his breath. He was originally looking forward to the answer, but now he was afraid. Royal Sister, was she really not his blood relative? Would there be more possibilities between them? Gong Dai stared at the pair of blood-stained feet for a long time. Finally, he took out the parchment from his chest. Coincidentally, there was a drop of blood on the parchment. He stretched out his hand and it landed on the parchment. It was as if a drop of ice water was dropped into boiling oil, and it finally exploded violently. After Shang Mingxi returned, although he was sitting quietly beside Sai Wuyan, he was thinking about other things. He had seen the man who suddenly appeared once before, at the birthday banquet of the Dai Yu State's emperor. At that time, he was very reserved. He did not expect that in just a few years, he would grow to this extent. At this time, Bai Chio also knew that Gong Yimo was carried back by a man. He was depressed. Just when he was washing his hands, he saw his face through the water. Because the wound was too deep, it had already left a scar. Originally, he did not care about it, but when he heard that the man was as noble as a god, he suddenly felt that the scar was an eyesore. Shang Mingxi saw that he was silent and could not help but laugh. Do you know who the person who carried her back is? Bai Chio wiped his hands and said lightly, I'm not interested to know. Shang Mingxi continued, he is the person who holds the power and economic lifeline of Dai Yu State. Can you guess who he is? Bai Chio was shocked. He is Prince Qi. But if he is Gong Yimo's brother, why are they so close? Could it be? Bai Chio was shocked. Shang Mingxi saw him like this and could not help but walk over and pat his shoulder. Prince Qi likes his sister. That's it. There is nothing difficult to understand. But they are. Bai Chio widened his eyes. The first reaction of an old-fashioned person like him was that he was not allowed to exist in this world. But what? Shang Mingxi raised his brows. The Prince of Qi is rich and powerful. Who dares to oppose whatever he wants to do? Moreover, I think both parties are interested in this matter. They didn't say anything, so what's there to be anxious about? Bai Chio couldn't stand it anymore. He wanted to find Gong Yimo and ask her about it. As soon as he moved, he was stopped by Shang Mingxi. He looked at Bai Chio and smiled meaningfully. Don't make a fearless competition. She doesn't belong to you. With just one sentence, Bai Chio's body stiffened. He wanted to refute loudly. He wanted to tell Shang Mingxi that he didn't like women at all. He hated all women. He went to look for Gong Yimo just to tell her that this matter was wrong. There was no personal feelings involved. However, in Shang Mingxi's perceptive eyes, those pompous words could not be said. He stood there in a daze, as if he had lost his soul. At the same time, Gong Dai also seemed to have lost his soul. He looked at the parchment in his hand, as if he was caught in a difficult puzzle. What are you doing? Gong Yimo's voice suddenly sounded. It was low, but to him, it was like thunder. He subconsciously put the parchment back into his arms. You woke up. Gong Dai didn't know what kind of mood he should use to face her. He stood there, but he didn't go forward immediately. Gong Yimo felt a little strange. Her head was still dizzy, but she stretched out her hand to him. Gong Dai then went forward and held her hand. Gong Yimo sighed. So you really came. You're so timely every time. You're like my guardian angel. Gong Yimo's mouth was very sweet. She was thinking about something in her heart. She was afraid that Gong Dai would settle accounts with her. But strangely, Gong Dai didn't get angry. Instead, his expression seemed to be frozen, as if he didn't understand what she was talking about. Gong Dai? Gong Yimo looked at him suspiciously. Suddenly, she leaned her head closer and said in puzzlement, "What's the matter? Your heart is beating so fast." She reached out to touch, but Gong Dai grabbed her hand. His grip was a little tight, making Gong Yimo frown. "What's the matter?" Her clear voice sounded in the quiet room. Because she was still not awake, her voice was a little dragged. But at this time, she also felt the atmosphere in the room was cold, and there was an inexplicable danger floating. Gong Dai tightly pursed his lips and deeply stared at her. When Gong Yimo completely woke up and stared at him with her round eyes, he spoke in a hoarse voice. "Royal sister, are you hiding something from me?" Gong Yimo was surprised. At this time, her upper body was half lying on Gong Dai's lap. When she suddenly heard this, she couldn't quite react. Could it be that Gong Ju was referring to her past? After all, other than that, there was nothing else that she could hide from him. She didn't know why, but when it came to this, Gong Yimo didn't know where to start. If Gong Dai asked her if she had always known about her parentage, why didn't she tell him, and why she had always been indifferent when he was conflicted and in pain, how would she answer? Could she say that it was because of what happened in her previous life that she had always resisted him? She might as well pretend that she didn't know. Before Gong Yimo could come up with a solution, Gong Dai had already touched her long hair. At a place where she couldn't see, his gaze was as deep as the abyss. "Royal sister, let's have a child, okay?" Gong Yimo was stunned again, but this wasn't the end. In the quiet room, Gong Dai said softly as he touched her hair. "Have 2 children, one like you and one like me. When the time comes, the son can protect the daughter and you, and I can also protect you." Gong Yimo didn't know what to think as her face turned red. She lay on his lap and pretended to be dead. However, Gong Dai's voice had a hint of seduction as it lingered on the tip of her ear. "Do you want to have a child?" he asked. Damn it. So embarrassing. Gong Yimo's face was burning. She didn't know why Gong Dai suddenly said such a thing. However, Gong Dai obviously didn't want to let her go. He smiled slightly. That exquisite face of his had a captivating beauty under the candlelight. The night was as cold as water. His fair fingertips lingered on Gong Yimo's collarbone, looking very seductive. "Do you want to have a child?" he asked again. Gong Yimo's face was as red as blood. She secretly scolded herself for waking up. However, Gong Dai flipped over and actually jumped onto the bed in a position where he was on top of her. Of course, he was very careful and didn't press on her wound. Instead, he lifted her chin and forced her to look into his eyes. Under the candlelight, there seemed to be stars dancing in her wide-open eyes. They were moist and made one want to take a bite out of them. Give birth. Momo. Chapter 489. Give birth to your sister. Gong Yimo had just uttered a word when she was kissed by Gong Dai in an extremely overbearing manner. He didn't know why his heart was beating so fast. His kiss was also very urgent, making Gong Yimo feel dizzy and breathless. She looked at the dark sky and saw that there was only a single lamp in the room. In this dark and windy night, the 2 people kissing on the bed was a very dangerous thing. Gong Dai bit her lips, and she hissed softly. Their lips and teeth touched, and she heard Gong Dai say in a low and hoarse voice that made her heart beat faster. "Momo, you're not focused." Gong Yimo swallowed her saliva. She only felt that the person in front of her was like a demon, making her drool. His black hair was entangled with hers, and his perfect and delicate face was half bright and half dark in the flickering candlelight, highlighting the delicate outline of his face. He was like a seductive demon. He raised his hand to touch her face, and the light penetrated his fingertips. Every knuckle was inconceivably beautiful. His eyes were dark, and in the darkness there seemed to be an undercurrent surging. Gong Yimo was bewitched. Before his fingertips fell on her face, she hooked her arms around his neck, propped up her upper body, and kissed his lips. In the next second, Gong Dai's hand slid from the side of her face to the back of her head. He pressed her down and entangled her deeply with him. Gong Yimo cried out, and in an instant all of her reason collapsed. This scene was very dangerous. Gong Dai panted and let go of her. If he didn't let go, this seductress would seduce him until he lost his reason. Gong Yimo smiled sweetly. Because she was lying down, Gong Dai could see every expression on her face with the help of the candlelight. Her eyes were moist, and her white teeth were exposed. Her smile was a bit mischievous, but when she blinked, it was very seductive. "How is it, Gong Xiaojue? Are you satisfied with my enthusiasm?" Gong Dai's right hand, which had been supporting himself on the bed, suddenly grasped the quilt tightly. This demoness was seducing him. She knew that he wouldn't force himself on her since she was injured, so she seduced him. Seeing that Gong Dai was restraining himself from speaking, Gong Yimo's anger grew. Her hand slipped into his lapel, but was caught by Gong Dai's left hand in time. "Momo, do you know what you're doing?" His tone was very dangerous. Although he was trying his best to suppress his breathing, it was obvious that his breathing was unstable. Gong Yimo stared at him without blinking. Then, her gaze followed the tip of his nose, his chin, his collarbone, and slowly moved down. That teasing gaze seemed to actually scratch Gong Dai's body. His heart suddenly tightened, and he couldn't help but hold his breath. "I know." Her voice was as soft as a kitten's. On the bed, there was an indescribable seduction. She placed her elbows on the bed and raised her head to bite his earlobe. As expected, his body trembled. He seemed to be on the verge of collapse. "I've said it before, the next time I see you, I'll be with you," she whispered in his ear. "Royal sister," Gong Dai suddenly shouted in a low voice. He directly sealed the lips of this torturous little demoness, and fiercely pressed her back onto the bed. Gong Yimo let out a low cry and was completely swallowed by him. Both of them were very nervous. A feeling of excitement and panic made them forget to control themselves. Until Gong Dai accidentally touched her wound in his delirious state. Gong Yimo let out a cry and woke Gong Dai up. At this moment, his eyes were red and it was obvious that he had lost his rationality. However, Royal Sister was covered in wounds. Gong Dai fiercely gritted his teeth. He couldn't wait to bite this little demoness to death. She clearly knew that she couldn't do it, but he couldn't bear to do it. His heart ached for her even when she frowned, so how could he bear to hurt her? He couldn't wait any longer. If he stayed any longer, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself. Gong Dai glanced at Gong Yimo again and was ready to go out. Gong Yimo looked at him blankly. Her eyes blinked and her small mouth was slightly open. It was red and moist in the candlelight. Gong Dai's Adam's apple moved. At this time, he should go out, but he felt that he couldn't move at all. The two of them were in a stalemate. Gong Yimo suddenly narrowed her eyes and said in a very torturous voice, "Actually, it's not that painful. Come on. I can bear it." Boom. Gong Dai seemed to hear the sound of his blood exploding. In less than a second, he got up and disappeared from the room. Gong Yimo looked at his embarrassed figure and secretly smiled. Gong Dai must have gone to put out the fire. He looked so embarrassed when he ran out just now. It was really a rare sight to see the regent in such an embarrassing state. But although she secretly smiled, Gong Yimo still felt relieved in her heart. She had a premonition that Gong Dai seemed to have already known about her past. And he was so smart. He must have guessed that she already knew about it from some of the things she occasionally said. Then it was a bit of a headache. How was she going to explain that she always knew about her past, but still used this matter to force him to give up? He would think that she did this because she hated him very much, right? Moreover, later on, they were clearly in love with each other. Why didn't she tell him about this matter? Did it prove that her love for him was fake? Gong Yimo pondered. If she was Gong Dai, she would definitely think so. But, Gong Yimo sighed. He didn't experience the things in his previous life, so it was meaningless to talk about it. But how could she, as a person who had experienced it personally, be indifferent? If she pretended that she didn't know about this matter, with Gong Dai's attentiveness to her, after he knew about this matter, and then thinking about what she said in the past, would he believe that she didn't know? Gong Yimo had a headache, so she forced Gong Dai to go away and think of a countermeasure. And Gong Dai was also practicing at this time. Sweat poured down like rain, using this to dissipate the heat in his heart. At the last moment, he suddenly thought of something that was bothering him in his heart. The heat in his heart cooled down, and he even felt a bit of heartache. Royal Sister's blood could be merged into the map. That meant that she was really from the Snow Clan, and not his blood relative. This matter should have made him wild with joy. But the moment he found out the truth, his mind suddenly flipped over some of the words she had said before. He wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. He actually thought that his sister knew about it from the very beginning. This thought was too frightening. If she had known about her identity from the start, then how much did she hate him? So even if he was in so much pain, she still refused to tell him the truth. He thought that they had already reached a point where they were mutually in love, but she had held back several times when she wanted to say something. Why was that? Was it because he didn't do enough, or she didn't like him? Gong Dai never thought that one day he would fall into this kind of mess. He didn't know that when a person fell into the web of love, even the most decisive person would think left and right because of a little change, tossing and turning restlessly. He felt pain, as if his internal organs were tangled together by a fine needle and thread. He felt that he was thinking too much. Maybe Royal Sister didn't know? Chapter 490. But he did not dare to ask. He was afraid that if he heard the answer, he would be even more at a loss. In the end, even someone as strong as Gong Dai was in love for the first time. The news of Empress Dowager Yu Qi's escape shocked the entire Yu Qi, especially those aristocratic families in Yuhua City. They trusted the Empress Dowager, which was why they helped her with all their might. Who knew that the Empress Dowager only brought less than 40,000 people back, and they even escaped? How could they not be shocked? In addition, many clans suffered losses. They had no choice but to seek an explanation from the Empress Dowager, but they were all rejected by the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager was very angry now. Her entire person was gloomy, and the little prince was crying non-stop, which disturbed her greatly. Bastard! You can't even coax a child, what's the use of keeping him? Someone come! Drag this lowly servant away and flog her 100 times. How could 100 palace flogs save her life? But before she could beg for mercy, she was dragged away. The child fell into the hands of another person, who continued to cry non-stop. The Empress Dowager's cold gaze landed on the palace servant, scaring him so much that he finally knelt down with a plop. At this moment, someone came to report. Empress Dowager, a commoner girl, is beating the drum and asking for an audience. She has presented this letter. The Empress Dowager was already very angry, but the next sentence made her anger stagnate. She said that she has a way to make the princess from Daiyu State leave Yu Qi. The Empress Dowager narrowed her eyes and finally received the letter. After reading it, she suddenly gave a strange smile. Men, summon that lady for an audience. Yes. Gong Yimo lay on the bed and looked at her feet being wrapped up layer by layer. She was in so much pain that she gasped. Gong Dai sat behind her, allowing her to lean in his arms. Whenever she felt pain, she would pinch Gong Dai. She was clearly bullying him, but her eyes were watery, as if she was being bullied. Liu Ranxin buried his head in bandaging Gong Yimo's wounds. As a divine doctor, when had he ever been so cowardly? Gong Yimo stared at Liu Ranxin, and suddenly said, "Could it be that you are the medical saint Liu Ranxin, divine Dr. Liu?" Actually, she already knew about it in the morning, but she waited until Gong Dai was here to say it. She was just about to look for this godly doctor when Gong Dai sent it over. What a godly assist. Liu Ranxin snorted a few times. At least this girl had some knowledge. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes and pitifully raised her head to look at Gong Dai's chin. Gong Dai, can you ask him to treat someone for me? Gong Dai didn't need to guess to know that she was talking about Sai Wuyan. His eyes narrowed dangerously at the thought of this name. When he found out that the royal sister was so heavily injured because of Sai Wuyen, he had already restrained himself by not killing him directly, but now he wanted to save him. Seeing the coldness in Gong Dai's eyes, Gong Yimo shrunk her neck and said, "If I don't save him, wouldn't I have suffered this injury for nothing?" Gong Dai touched her face, and in front of Liu Ranxin, lowered his head and kissed her forehead. "You're not allowed to mention other men in front of me." Liu Ranxin trembled, and couldn't wait to leave. He couldn't leave. Gong Yimo grabbed onto Gong Dai's collar, and said with some difficulty, "But I think that Sai Wuyen is better than the Empress Dowager to be the emperor. In this, there are no personal feelings involved." Gong Dai, she dragged the word choice endlessly, and acted coquettishly. Her charming face pulled, as if she was very unhappy. Gong Dai looked at her and his heart softened, but he still kept his mouth shut and refused to let go. Liu Ranxin pretended that he didn't exist. In fact, an old antique like him should be very impatient to see this kind of scene, especially when this man and woman were in such a relationship. But for some reason, looking at the intimate interaction between the two, that kind of tacit understanding and warmth, he actually felt envious. Thinking of this, the old bachelor was angry again. Because of his anger, he inevitably hit a little harder. Gong Yimo hissed softly, and in the next second, Gong Dai's cold gaze fell on Liu Ranxin. "Liu Ranxin, can't you just happily apply the medicine?" Gong Yimo pestered Gong Dai again. "Gong Dai." She continued to drag out her words, and pointed with one finger. "Just once, one last time. Is that okay?" Gong Dai shook his head. "No way, who was the emperor in Yuchi, who lived or died, what did it have to do with him?" Gong Yimo also lost her patience. She moved her feet and smiled at Liu Ranxin. "Divine Dr. Liu, can you come back later? We would like to have a private talk." She thickened her skin and requested, but who knew that Liu Ranxin would stand up and leave in the next second. The process was so resolute, as if he had wanted to leave long ago, but just didn't dare to. In a moment, only Gong Yimo and Gong Dai were left in the room. Gong Yimo didn't stand on ceremony as she directly flipped her body and pushed Gong Dai onto the bed. Gong Dai frowned slightly. "Be careful, don't hurt yourself." Gong Yimo didn't care. She frowned and looked sternly at Gong Dai. It was time for him to understand what was called the 3 obediences and 4 virtues. Even her coquettish act was useless. Her jade finger poked his chest. "Why aren't you obedient? Do you know how critical Sai Wuyen's situation is now? He's about to die." Gong Dai was unhappy that she kept talking about other men, so he said coldly, "If he's going to die, so be it." Gong Yimo was furious. She pouted. "Do you still want to be with me?" "Yes." This was his answer without hesitation. Then he frowned again. "You can only be with me." Gong Yimo suddenly felt a little shy. Ever since the two of them had confirmed their relationship, she would often feel flustered by Gong Dai's flirting. But she couldn't disobey him. She said sternly, "Then why don't you listen to me?" She pouted again. "I just want to finish this matter quickly and go back quickly. When the time comes, if Dai Yu State can't tolerate us, we can still go out to sea together." Gong Dai was attracted by her beautiful blueprint, but he still couldn't forget the fact that it was Sai Wuyen who had caused her to be injured all over. He should just die. It was hard to change Gong Dai's mind, but he had met Gong Yimo. Seeing that he wouldn't budge, Gong Yimo rolled her eyes and lowered her body to lie on his chest. "Let me ask you. Do you agree?" Gong Dai shook his head. "No. He had actually been kissed by force. Gong Yimo swallowed all his objections. Her eyes were moist and her face was red as she asked again. "Do you agree?" This time, she lowered her head and sucked on Gong Dai's lips before he could answer. His lips were delicious. They were soft and had a minty fragrance. They were cool and warm at the same time. She didn't get tired of playing with them. Seeing Gong Ju looking at her with a deep gaze, Ji Yunshu quickly separated their lips. She crouched on top of him and bit her lower lip, pretending to be strong. But in fact, Gong Ju's gaze caused her back to tingle, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. Chapter 491. Are you going to agree or not? Gong Yimo was bullied by his gaze, but she refused to give up. If he didn't agree, she would be angry. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and suddenly smiled. He was used to being cold and indifferent. When he smiled, it was like a polished gem, showing off his elegance. There seemed to be a glow in his black and white eyes. His beautiful smile had a hint of cleanliness and shyness. He was simply irresistible. Gong Yimo kissed him. Before she could savor his taste, he flipped her over and pressed her under him. As they flipped over, both of them felt each other's scorching body temperature. Royal sister, you really like to play with fire. His lips curled into a smile as he stared at her dangerously. His stare caused her entire body to tense up, but she also felt a little numb. She felt wronged and poked his chest under him. It's all because you're disobedient, so? His action of raising his eyebrows slightly was unbelievably handsome. So, you're going to take advantage of me? Gong Yimo blushed instantly. Their breaths intertwined and their hearts beat faster. He didn't dare to act rashly because of her body, but Gong Yimo didn't have any scruples. Seeing that he didn't dare to move, she became bold. I don't care. If you don't agree, I'll force you until you agree. Oh! Something flashed in his eyes and his voice gradually became inaudible. How are you going to force me? His voice was really flirtatious. Gong Yimo blushed and avoided his gaze. Suddenly, she had an idea. How about this? I'll seduce you. If you can resist running out, I won't mention this matter anymore. Gong Dai frowned. He didn't want to agree to such a ridiculous thing, but when he thought of her seducing him, his heart heated up again, so he didn't say anything for a while. Seeing that he hesitated and didn't reject her directly, Gong Yimo struck while the iron was hot. Okay, we're a couple now. Isn't it good for couples to use such an intimate method to solve problems? Regardless of whether you win or lose, isn't it, again? Gong Dai looked at her delicate face, and his heart was filled with sweetness. Yes, they were now a couple, so what was there to be ridiculous about? As long as she was happy, he would play with her. Moreover, he could practice his martial arts, and when he used his inner circulation, he could ignore all distractions. He was not afraid that she would succeed, so in the end, he nodded his head nobly. Sure, but there has to be a time limit. Gong Yimo pointed at the sandalwood incense that was still burning not far away. The sandalwood incense was placed in an exquisite little cauldron and was burning very quickly. How about this sandalwood stick as the limit? Gong Dai simply let go of her. Sure. Gong Yimo laughed. She watched as he sat down on the couch with his legs crossed. He actually wanted to meditate and cultivate his internal energy. How could she let him have his way? She directly sat between his legs and carefully placed her injured foot on the couch. Her hands hooked around his neck. Gong Dai, she blew air into his ear. Seeing that his ears were red and he closed his eyes, pretending to be indifferent, Gong Yimo was happy and began to change the way she addressed him. Darling. This was the first time Gong Dai heard such a sweet nickname. Darling. Although he did not understand the meaning of it, when she called it softly, it gave him a sweet feeling, and it made his heart itch. No. Gong Ju frowned and began to meditate on the inner strength cultivation method. Usually, when he cultivated in silence, he could not hear a single sound from outside, unless there was danger. But now, even though his internal energy was flowing along the track of his internal energy, her voice could still be heard without any hindrance, teasing his nerves. Seeing that he still did not move, Gong Yimo pursed her lips and smiled, licking his Adam's apple. Her actions were passionate and bold, which made Gong Dai's body tense up. He could not concentrate his thoughts. Gong Yimo struck while the iron was hot and hooked around his neck, calling out sweetly, "Darling?" What kind of nickname was this? Gong Dai finally gave up on cultivating. It would not be good if he was distracted by her, so when he heard that, he opened his clear eyes and looked at her. What do you mean? He asked. It was not his fault, because he rarely went to brothels. Even if he went, it was because he had something to do, so he did not know that this was a kind of intimate language between a man and a woman. Gong Yimo hugged him as if she had no bones, smiling as she explained to him. The heart is the most important part of a person. It's like I died without a heart. And the term darling is used to describe the most precious treasure in the world, or it can be a person's special love, but it has to be unique, so. She looked into Gong Dai's eyes and told him with certainty and focus, So you are the most precious treasure in the world, the love of my heart. Without you, it's like having no heart, and I will die. This was the first time he had been attacked by words of love. He did not know how the others reacted, but Gong Dai did not recover for a long time. He blinked. Those words were obviously very ordinary when taken apart, but when put together, they had a strong impact. It made his brain, which had always been very clear, fall into a fog. His heart beat faster, and his mouth was dry. He could not help but hug Gong Yimo. He buried his head in her neck and told her firmly, "Momo, you are also my darling." Gong Yimo was flirting with him, but she did not expect him to learn so quickly. She was flirted with back. Her body really turned into a pool of water, flowing in his arms. Her heart was so sweet that it was sickening. It turned out that this was the feeling of mutual love. It was not that one party was blindly giving, but that both of them only had each other. At that moment, Gong Yimo had a kind of enlightenment. Perhaps this was love. Perhaps this was the greatest compensation given to her by God. But she still had some rationality. Half of the sandalwood incense had been burned. She did not believe that she could not take down Gong Dai. If she lost today, she would not lose the bet, but the dominance. If the wife's discipline was not shaken, how could she rule the world? So she continued, "Gong Dai, do you know what is the most important thing between a couple?" Gong Dai naturally knew, but he did not say it. "It is trust," Gong Yimo said softly. At this moment, she suddenly understood something. She understood something that she had always overlooked. In her previous life, did Gong Che not trust her? Was he afraid that she would be disloyal because of her strong deterrence in the military? Was that why he could not wait to suppress her? Gong Yimo could not help but smile bitterly at this thought. She gently hugged Gong Dai and said something that did not make any sense. "We trust each other, and our hearts are connected, right?" Gong Dai nodded. He also felt that he should not overthink things. Whether or not the royal sister knew about her background, and whether or not she told him, she must have her reasons. Her heart was not made of stone. She had been softening step by step until now. It was laughable that he had been thinking too much. He must have done something wrong to make her like this. Now that he could hug her like this, how could she not like him? Chapter 492. Thinking of this, Gong Dai's mood suddenly brightened, and he hugged her even tighter. The fragrance of her body mixed with the smell of medicine lingered at the tip of his nose. He had long been sure that this was the person he wanted to spend the rest of his life with, and he had to trust her. They hugged like this for a while. Although they didn't speak, they seemed to have communicated a lot. A faint warmth flowed through their veins, and both of them found peace. At this moment, Gong Yimo suddenly realized that the incense was about to burn out. She quivered and looked up at him timidly. "So, do you believe that I like you?" Gong Dai smiled gently, and his unique clean and cold temperament spread, but more than that, there was gentleness. He lowered his head and kissed her sweet lips, and nodded. Gong Yimo was a little embarrassed. "Then you will save Sai Wuyen, right?" "I promise, this is definitely the last time. When Yuchi's matter is over, and the Crown Prince ascends to the throne, we won't participate in the world's major events." Towards the end, her expression gradually became serious. Once the 4 countries settled down, were peaceful, and developed, she felt that the debt from her previous life had been repaid, and perhaps she could enjoy a life that belonged to her. It was really strange. When she first woke up in this life, she thought that she would be running around for the rest of her life. There were always so many things in this world, and she couldn't finish them all in her life. It could only be said that it was very fulfilling. She had always felt that there was nothing wrong with such a fulfilling life, but ever since she slowly accepted Gong Dai, she suddenly wondered if she could start living for herself. Could it be that she could only use this life of hers to atone for her sins? She was no different from others, and was just a drop in the ocean of all living things. She could also have a different life, and she could grow, lose, and gain. Gong Dai was her greatest gain. She would work hard, try to forget the past, and be with him wholeheartedly. When there was only a little left of the incense, Gong Dai was still shocked by the meaning of her words, but she had already thought it through. "Do you agree?" Gong Yimo's eyes were shining. After a long time, before the last wisp of incense rose, he sighed and kissed her forehead. As you wish. For the sea and Jianghu that you mentioned, and also for the sake of abandoning worldly affairs and living hand in hand with you for the rest of his life, what is there that he can't endure and give in to? Gong Dai was also very glad. Gong Yimo was the most precious treasure in his life. There is no other. Liu Ranxin owed Gong Dai a favor and agreed to help 3 times. He originally thought that this time would be the same as the previous 2 times, and it wouldn't be a big deal. Who knew that when he met Sai Wuyan, he would find it tricky. It seemed like he had no choice but to give it his all. Was this princess deliberately trying to ruin his reputation? The next day, Gong Dai's remaining troops arrived at Snow City. However, Snow City had already been cleaned up. There were not many traces of the battle. Xiao Qi brought some people to report to Gong Dai. At this moment, a woman standing behind Xiao Qi stepped forward and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." In the corridor, Gong Dai didn't pay much attention to her, but the woman didn't leave. She opened her mouth and said, "Your Highness, the wedding dress needs some gold embroidery thread and snowblue cloud silk." I wonder. Gong Dai stopped and looked at her. This woman was saved by Xiao Qi when she first entered Jade Qi. Gong Dai didn't pay attention to her at first, but this woman pestered Gong Dai and said that her embroidery skills were good, and she had no relatives or friends. She hoped that Gong Dai would accept her, even if it meant doing odd jobs. Gong Dai turned to leave, but when he saw the handkerchief she raised, he suddenly changed his mind. The embroidery was indeed lifelike, as if it was real. He had never seen such extraordinary skills. He suddenly thought that if she could embroider a wedding dress for the royal sister, it would be a good choice. That was why she could stay and travel with the troops. She had been well behaved along the way, so Gong Dai had forgotten about her. Now that she was in front of him, he frowned slightly. Xiao Qi quickly said, "Miss Li Xiu, if you need anything, just tell me." When Gong Dai saw that Xiao Qi had spoken, he didn't pay any more attention to her and left. Li Xiu saw that Gong Dai didn't say a word to her and was even a little dissatisfied. She unconsciously twisted the handkerchief in her hand, her thoughts written all over her face. Xiao Qi had a good impression of this woman and couldn't help but say, "Miss Li Xiu, if you have feelings for the prince, you should give up on this idea as soon as possible." "Why?" Li Xiu was considered pretty and asked subconsciously. She then realized that she had said something wrong, but still couldn't help asking, "Is it the woman that the prince wants me to embroider for the wedding dress?" Xiao Qi sighed, "In short, there's no chance." Li Xiu was a little hurt, "Even if it's as a concubine? I fell in love with the prince at first sight. I don't ask for a title, even a servant is fine." Another woman was infatuated with the wrong man. Xiao Qi sighed inwardly that the prince hurt people invisibly, but he still had to do his job. "Miss Li Xiu, you should put away these thoughts. There are almost no women in the prince's residence, only the mistress. If you make the prince unhappy, no one can save you." His words made Li Xiu's face turn ugly. She said in a low voice, "That's right, I don't have any status, and I'm not very beautiful, it's my wishful thinking." After that, Li Xiu lowered her head and left. Xiao Qi was also uncomfortable. In fact, he quite liked this girl. She looked weak, but she wasn't troublesome at all. She was a sensible and independent girl. He hoped that she would be able to think things through. No one cared about this episode. The most important thing now was whether Sai Wuyan could survive, and how the Empress Dowager would counterattack. In the end, what came was an imperial edict. In the edict, the Empress Dowager sternly reprimanded Gong Yimo. She said that Gong Yimo seduced the emperor and then kidnapped him. The country couldn't go a day without a ruler, but the emperor was deceived by the demoness of the Dai Yu state and went against the Empress Dowager. In the end, the Dai Yu state took advantage of the situation. Therefore, the Empress Dowager ordered Gong Yimo to hand over the emperor. Otherwise, she would abolish the emperor for the sake of the world's safety and appoint a new one. Or, she would ask Gong Yimo to leave Yuqi. This was a civil war in Yuqi, and it had nothing to do with outsiders. It had to be said that this move was ingenious. If the Empress Dowager insisted on abolishing Sai Wuyan, those who supported Sai Wuyan would definitely not agree. But now that Gong Yimo had interfered, the nature of the situation was different. Although she took Sai Wuyan away to save his life, it was a fact that she was in charge of the battle in Snow City. Later on, Gong Dai had interfered with the secret weapon and turned the situation around. This was a civil war in Yuchi. Gong Dai and Gong Yimo were from the Daiyu state, but they were stationed here with extremely dangerous weapons. What was the meaning of this? Therefore, for the sake of Yuchi's safety, those who supported Sai Wuyan were also afraid that Sai Wuyan would become Gong Yimo's puppet. Therefore, they all supported the expulsion of Gong Yimo. Chapter 493. As for Gong Dai, no one dared to say anything about him. First, they knew that once Gong Yimo left, Gong Dai would leave too. Second, they felt that Gong Dai was too ruthless, which could be seen in the Battle of Snow City. As soon as he appeared, he killed thousands of people in an instant. Such ruthlessness. So, no one dared to offend him. Was this what it meant to pick on the weak? When Gong Yimo heard the news, she looked at her feet, which could not stand on the ground. She felt that the Empress Dowager was smart enough to unite the two forces to get rid of her first. However, Sai Wuyan had not woken up yet. When she asked Liu Ranxin only said that it was a little complicated and he needed more time. So, Gong Yimo made a prompt decision to ignore the Empress Dowager's order and let the rumors spread. Anyway, whatever she did now would be wrong. She had already thought it through. As soon as Sai Wuyan woke up, she would ask Gong Dai to take him to the root of the problem, which would save a lot of effort. And once Sai Wuyan was stable, they would leave. The mess of Yuchi would be handed over to Sai Wuyan to deal with. She would not care about it anymore. It was simple and crude. Speaking of which, it was because Gong Dai was here. She did not need to worry about anything. Anyway, Gong Dai would think for her. But gradually, the rumors became more and more intense. Many people said that Sai Wuyan had been killed by her, which was why he had not shown up. As a result, both the Empress Dowager's party and the Empress party could not sit still. So, the Empress Dowager secretly persuaded a few people from the Empress party to change sides. They all thought that an emperor controlled by the Daiyu state was not as good as a young emperor controlled by the Empress Dowager. This was the difference between the internal and external forces. When there were internal conflicts, they each did their own thing. But when it escalated to a conspiracy between two countries, they were united again. Gong Yimo was an outsider with bad intentions. These days, there were even ordinary people in front of the gate of Snow City cursing with righteous indignation. He wanted the people of Daiyu state to get out of Yuchi and wanted Gong Yimo to hand over the emperor. This was obviously instigated by someone. The commoners were not fools. In such a tense situation, who would stand out if there were no benefits? Gong Yimo didn't know at first because Gong Dai didn't want her to worry about such a small matter, so she focused on recuperating. By the time Gong Yimo found out about this, it was already too late. There were people committing suicide in front of the governor's office. Moreover, there were 10 of them at once. This caused the entire city to panic. The governor had no choice. After Shang Mingxi found out, he came to see the princess. Originally, Little Seven was ordered to stop all the unrelated people, but Gong Yimo's hearing was good. Once she heard the voice, she knew who it was. She hurriedly let him in. Xiao Qi's face was bitter. He didn't want to work here anymore. He couldn't offend either the prince or the princess. Things wouldn't end well for him. Gong Yimo looked at Shang Mingxi. After not seeing him for a few days, he still looked the same, not anxious at all. Seeing how calm you are you not worried about Sai Wuyan at all? Or have you already found your next job and don't need to worry about your future? Shang Mingxi smiled, revealing 2 small canine teeth. It's still the princess who understands me. That's right, I really have found my next job. Who? Shang Mingxi slowly said, I feel that working under the princess is not bad. Gong Yimo laughed, I don't dare to have you. If something happens to me and you run away, even if I don't get killed, I'll be angered to death by you. Shang Mingxi rubbed his nose and returned to the main topic. He told Gong Yimo about the people committing suicide outside the governor's office. Gong Yimo sighed, it has reached this point. The Empress Dowager is really to use this kind of method. Shang Mingxi shook his head. I think that this matter is not the Empress Dowager's doing. No, to be more accurate, this shouldn't be the Empress Dowager's idea. Oh. Gong Yimo sat up straight. I'd like to hear the details. Shang Mingxi slightly curved his lips, his eyes looking at one place, but he seemed to see through it to another place. Based on my understanding of the Empress Dowager, she wouldn't use this kind of shameless method. The Empress Dowager was born rich and did as she pleased until now. She doesn't know much about these kinds of private and despicable methods. So there's still a hidden enemy. Gong Yimo thought left and right, but she couldn't think of anyone who would go against her. Suddenly, there was a commotion outside, followed by the sound of weapons clashing. What's wrong? Shang Mingxi motioned for her to calm down and go out to take a look. But when he opened the door, the light of a sword rushed towards him. Be careful. This was Little Seven's voice. The moment she heard the warning, Gong Yimo threw the cup at the head of the bed to avoid the opponent's menacing sword. Shang Mingxi had just escaped death, so his reaction was still considered nimble. He immediately turned around and distanced himself from the opponent, but there was more than one person coming. Little Seven brought people to intercept them in the courtyard, but they kept retreating. These people's martial arts were very high. The person who had rushed into Gong Yimo's room saw that Gong Yimo couldn't move, so he directly stabbed towards her. Gong Yimo saw his appearance and was so shocked that she forgot to dodge. But before the opponent's sword could reach her, a narrow sword had already pierced through his chest. After the attacker died, Gong Dai appeared behind him, clearly in a hurry. Seeing her pale face, Gong Dai didn't care about the continuous killing outside and quickly asked, "Royal sister, what's wrong?" Gong Yimo stared blankly at the corpses on the ground, then looked at him. After a while, she shook her head. Nothing. Quickly go and kill all of them here. They might be here for Lei Yifeng. Gong Dai shook his head. It's nothing, don't worry. As soon as his voice fell, Luo Qi and the others rushed over. With them joining the battle, the situation changed. A moment later, all the ambushers were killed. Luo Qi left one alive, wanting to interrogate him about where he was from. However, he saw that the poison had already taken effect. His head tilted and he died. Luo Qi's face was ugly as he reported, "Your Highness, I don't know who they are, but they are all very skilled in martial arts, so they shouldn't be nameless people." Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo. She was still in a daze, but he didn't know why. "I know, clean up the corpses. Also, the Lei Yifeng must be guarded to death." At this time, Gong Yimo suddenly pulled on his sleeve. "You can leave it with me first." Gong Dai thought that royal sister had space, so he gladly agreed. He went out with Luo Qi, taking Shang Mingxi and the corpses on the ground with him. He also wanted to know what was wrong with the person he just stabbed to death. Why did royal sister look so surprised when she saw him? Why was she surprised? Gong Yimo sat on the bed, hugging her knees. That person was from Mount Yun Ding. Her thoughts were in a mess. She felt that many things were different from the last life, but why did people from Mount Yun Ding suddenly appear in Yuqi? It didn't make sense that Qiu Xingfeng sent people to kill her because he held a grudge against her for killing Long Hanyang, because Qiu Xingfeng wasn't that scheming. Then what was the reason for Mount Yun Ding to join the battle? Chapter 494. After a few more days, Gong Yimo was finally able to get out of bed, but she could only walk a little. Therefore, Gong Dai would not let her walk most of the time. He would carry her wherever she wanted to go. At first, Gong Yimo was a little embarrassed, but after a long time, she had become thick-skinned. Recently, the Empress Dowager had been making a lot of moves. Just as Gong Yimo did not want to let the situation develop any further and was about to fight back, Sai Wuyan finally woke up. After he woke up, he was in disbelief. He seemed to have had a very long dream. In the dream, he thought that he was going to die. He did not expect that he would survive. Liu Ranxin wiped the sweat on his forehead and thought proudly, "Of course, I was the one who did it." When Gong Yimo came over, Shang Mingxi had already told Sai Wuyan what had happened during this period of time. The Empress Dowager had forced Snow City to hand over the emperor, or she would depose him. The situation outside was getting more and more tense, but Sai Wuyen managed to survive and wake up in time. It was a great fortune in the midst of misfortune. Sai Wuyen's eyes lit up when he saw Gong Yimo. However, when he saw that she was carried in by Gong Dai, he could not help but smile sarcastically. When he was in the West Continent, he knew what Gong Dai was thinking. He did not expect that after so many years, he would really succeed. Gong Dai sat down with Gong Yimo in his arms. He did not put her on the chair next to him. Instead, he still held her in his arms. This kind of blatant declaration of sovereignty made Gong Yimo feel quite embarrassed. Shang Mingxi was fine. He was very careless and acted as if he did not see it. However, Sai Wuyen could not stand it anymore. He pointed to the chair next to him and said coldly, "Your foot is broken, not your body. Why do you have to sit on someone else's lap?" Gong Yimo was about to refute, but Gong Dai lowered his eyes slightly and looked coldly at Sai Wuyen. "It's none of your business." Similarly, there were two exquisite men sitting together. One of them was lying on the bed, wearing a white undergarment. Even though his face was pale, it couldn't hide the bad and evil feeling he gave off. Gong Dai, on the other hand, was always dressed in black with silver lines. He was handsome, but his expression was cold. Even when he was just sitting there, he gave off a powerful suppressive aura. He was completely different from Sai Wuyen. Gong Yimo saw that the two of them were not on good terms, so she went straight to the point. "All right. That, Shang Mingxi should have told you about the current situation, right? If you still don't wake up, your throne will be taken away by your son." In fact, after Sai Wuyen found out that he had a son, he also felt a little dizzy. He had been so careful, but he didn't expect that he would still be one step behind. So when it came to this, he felt a little guilty. But he still gritted his teeth and said, "His father is not dead yet." Gong Yimo pursed her lips and smiled. "My idea is simple. After you wake up, I will ask Gong Dai to lend you a hand and directly attack the enemy." Although Sai Wuyen had never seen a bomb, he had heard about its deterrence from Shang Mingxi. This was the simplest method, but it wasn't the best one. If the Empress Dowager spread rumors that he was already under the control of the Daiyu state, and if he really used a bomb to seize power, the aristocratic families in Yuchi would believe it and resist forcefully. Many people would die. So he shook his head. "I don't want him to help me." Gong Dai glanced at him indifferently. His meaning was clear: "I don't want to help you either." Gong Yimo felt a little awkward being stuck in the middle. "I know that you are worried, but under the pressure of absolute benefits and power, those people in Yuhua City will know what to do. Not many people will die." Sai Wuyen shook his head. "You don't understand that woman," he smiled. "When she is pushed to the brink, she can do anything. Moreover, if you interfere, it will only make things more complicated. After all, the bomb belongs to you. If you are not careful, it will turn into a conspiracy between countries. So, since this is Yuchi's problem, I will solve it." Gong Yimo fell silent. Sai Wuyen had been caught off guard this time, which was why he was in such a miserable state. He still had the ability to fight against the Empress Dowager in private. Moreover, the Empress Dowager had suffered a great defeat in this battle, causing resentment everywhere. Sai Wuyen and Shang Mingxi would definitely be able to win if they worked together, and their chances of winning were higher than the Empress Dowager's. Seeing Gong Yimo frown, Gong Dai asked, "This matter should not be delayed. This prince cannot interfere, but you should quickly gather your troops to attack Yuhua City. This prince's subordinates have sent news that the Empress Dowager is already gathering her troops." Sai Wuyen and Gong Dai were not on good terms, so he said angrily, "You don't need to tell me. We are already discussing the battle." Your Highness." Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and hugged Gong Yimo even tighter. Gong Yimo could feel his scorching body temperature through the thin material of their clothes, and she felt a little embarrassed. But she still said, "If you need my help, just let me know. Yuchi can only do business if it is stable. Our relationship is still a cooperative one." Sai Wuyen stared at Gong Dai's arm around Gong Yimo's waist and suddenly asked, "What, have you already accepted this incestuous relationship?" His face was pale, and his tone was mocking. Gong Yimo blinked when she heard that. Gong Dai hugged her even tighter and said without backing down, "I'll say the same thing again. It has nothing to do with you." Their gazes collided in the air, making Gong Yimo feel as if she was sitting on pins and needles. Sai Wuyen laughed coldly. "I have studied medicine for so many years, and I know very well that marriage between close relatives is the most likely to lead to abnormalities. There was once a small country that was ignorant. In order to preserve the so-called pure bloodline, all of its people married with close relatives. Later on, the country was destroyed. Don't you think that's interesting?" Gong Dai suddenly laughed. He reached out and touched Gong Yimo's face, his eyes filled with tenderness. "The child between me and royal sister will definitely be very healthy and smart. You don't have to worry about it." Sai Wuyen could not be bothered to talk to Gong Dai. He stared at Gong Yimo and asked, "Did you really agree to him? It's not like all the men in this world are dead. Why do you want him? Did he really think that he was dead, trying to poach someone in front of him?" Gong Dai was a little angry. He suddenly lifted Gong Yimo's chin, and in front of Sai Wuyen, lowered his head, blocked all of her words, and deeply kissed her delicate red lip. This action shocked everyone in the room except for him. Gong Yimo's eyes were wide open, and her cheeks were red, but she did not push him away. Shang Mingxi looked away, but Sai Wuyen's eyes were a little red. "Gong Yimo." He gritted his teeth and shouted. If they were not on the bed, perhaps he would have personally separated the two of them. This scene was really an eyesore. Gong Yimo finally came back to her senses. She pushed Gong Dai away and separated their lips. However, Gong Dai was still not satisfied. After being pushed away, he pressed her down and kissed her again. Only then did he raise his head and say aggressively, "There are many men in the world, but only I am worthy of her." Chapter 495. At this moment, a crisp sound was heard. It turned out that Bai Chio was standing at the door. He had gone to get some medicine for Sai Wuyen. He did not expect to see such a scene when he returned. The two of them were really shameless. Gong Yimo heard and looked at the door. When she saw that it was him, she felt a little embarrassed and glared at Gong Dai. "Can't you keep a low profile?" Her identity had not been announced yet. Even if it was announced, this was the ancient times. "Can't you consider the acceptance of the majority of the people?" Gong Dai smiled at her. He did not feel that he had done anything wrong. He had heard Bai Chio's footsteps. This was just right. He could kill two birds with one stone. Everyone wanted to spy on his people, but they had to have the ability to do so. "I'll go get another bowl," Bai Chio said and hurried off. Gong Yimo sighed. She guessed that Bai Chio must be scolding her for being shameless. His old face was about to be thrown away by Gong Dai. She helplessly said, "Gong Dai, I'm so tired. Go back to your room and rest." Gong Dai naturally followed her advice. He carried Gong Yimo and left, leaving Sai Wuyen angrily on the bed. He was full of unwillingness. Shang Mingxi sighed, "Your Majesty, why do you have to do this? Who knows, you might need Gong Dai's help. What's the good in offending him?" Sai Wuyen also knew this, but he just did not like Gong Dai. Shang Mingxi felt that Gong Dai was right. In terms of appearance, perhaps only the new emperor of Yuheng, Kim Yun, could be compared to him. In terms of family background, he was also a legitimate prince. His family was Junshi of Gojosian, who held real power. In terms of financial resources, it was said that Gong Dai's shops had already started to spread to Lu Yi. This way, his manpower could be spread across the 4 countries, not to mention the profits that the bank could bring. If this continued, not only Dai Yu State, but also the economies of the other 4 countries would not be able to do without him. When that time came, a single stomp of his foot would cause a huge crisis. Who would be able to compete with him in terms of wealth? Shang Mingxi still remembered the scene he had seen on the city wall. It was 200 people against 50,000 people. That kind of destructive power that could sweep away all obstacles and reap tens of thousands of lives in an instant was a terrifying scene that he would never forget for the rest of his life. Shang Mingxi lowered his eyelids. Gong Dai was right. He was indeed the only one worthy of Gong Yimo, because Gong Yimo was equally outstanding. Therefore, he comforted the emperor, "Your Majesty, the most important thing now is how to defeat the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager's defeat has caused many aristocratic families to be dissatisfied. If we take the opportunity to counterattack, we have about a 60% chance of winning." Cai Wuyan suddenly said, "I just can't accept it." "What?" Shang Mingxi did not react in time. He did not know what Cai Wuyan was referring to. Cai Wuyan lowered his eyelids and said with some resentment, "So what if Gong Dai is outstanding? His relationship with Gong Yimo is destined to not have a good ending. So what right does he have to keep Gong Yimo for himself? It's true that I like Gong Yimo, but there are many people who like her. She's not really married to Gong Dai, so why can't I like her?" Shang Mingxi laughed. It was rare that Cai Wuyan would talk about something else when he was talking about serious matters. It seemed like he really cared about Gong Yimo. But it was too late. Shang Mingxi sighed inwardly. "Your Majesty, there are so many beauties in Yuqi. Why do you have to get involved in this mess?" Cai Wuyan looked at Shang Mingxi and suddenly asked, "You like her too, right?" Shang Mingxi looked up abruptly, his gaze focused. Cai Wuyan sneered. "We've known each other for so many years. Do you think I don't know you? You're just too cowardly. You like her, but you don't dare to show it at all." Shang Mingxi laughed. Finally, he looked at the thin smoke coming out of the incense burner and sighed. "I know she doesn't belong to me, so I can restrain myself." "Can you?" Cai Wuyan was stunned when he heard that. His expression gradually turned cold. Gong Yimo was carried back by Gong Dai. The assassin's sudden attack last time made Gong Dai very worried about her. Even when he was dealing with government affairs, he wanted to stay with her and did not allow her to leave his sight. Once they returned to the room, Gong Dai asked her, "Are you sleepy?" Gong Yimo shook her head. She had just woken up not long ago. It was good that she was not sleepy. Gong Dai carried Gong Yimo and sat in front of the desk. There were many documents on the desk, all waiting for him to review. There was an unsigned letter at the top. Gong Dai knew that it was news about Mount Yunding, so he did not touch it. Ever since he found out that the royal sister was acting strangely, he thoroughly screened the assassins last time and finally found out that they were from Mount Yunding. Gong Dai was very puzzled. He knew that the martial arts they practiced were from Mount Yunding, but the royal sister had never been to Mount Yunding. How did she know their martial arts and seemed to know people from Mount Yunding? Sometimes, the truth was already in front of his eyes. It was just a matter of whether he was willing to believe it or not. Thus, he placed the secret letters about Mount Yunding at the bottom. He randomly picked up a secret report and began to review it. Gong Yimo sat in his arms. Seeing this, she found it funny. "Looks like you're as busy as the emperor." Gong Dai could kiss her forehead if he lowered his head slightly. He said in a low voice, "Don't mess around." Gong Yimo was tickled by his gentle breath. She laughed softly. "You're working. I'm so bored sitting here." She acted coquettishly. Gong Dai was already prepared. He opened the box of snacks on the table. "Eat some snacks and read." He knew that there were many books in Gong Yimo's space. Thus, in this quiet afternoon, Gong Dai reviewed the documents. Gong Yimo sat in his arms and read. She ate snacks from time to time. Time flew by. Gong Yimo looked at him for a while and felt a little sleepy. The autumn afternoon was warm and quiet. She leaned on Gong Dai's shoulder, her little head nodding. Gong Dai suddenly felt like he was raising a daughter. It was strange. From sister, teacher, to lover, to daughter, wasn't this a little too big? But he felt as if his heart was stuffed to the brim. He was very satisfied. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Gong Dai suddenly realized that these boring documents were a little interesting. Gong Yimo yawned slightly. She curled up in his arms like a cat and looked at his side profile. Why was he so handsome? His skin was so good, and his eyelashes were so long. The curve of his face was so exquisite that it was perfect. She wanted to drool just looking at him. Gong Yimo wrapped her arms around his neck. She rolled her eyes and picked up a piece of red bean cake for him. Gong Dai didn't like to eat sweets, but he never rejected anything that she fed him. So he opened his mouth and bit it. Usually, Gong Yimo would take away the remaining half of the red bean cake and wait for him to finish eating before feeding him the rest. But this time, she didn't take it away. Instead, she leaned forward and put the remaining half of the red bean cake into her mouth. Their lips gently touched. She bit off the red bean cake and the two of them ate half of it each. That kind of sweetness spread between the lips, and finally, the sweetness spread to the heart. Chapter 496. Gong Dai forgot to move. He looked at Gong Yimo in a daze. Recently, she had been taking more and more initiative, but this kind of intimacy still made him at a loss. However, he suppressed his joy and sweetness, wanting to appear calm. But with half of the red bean cake in his mouth, in the end, he swallowed it without even taking a bite. Gong Yimo secretly laughed when she saw this. Gong Dai was a little angry from embarrassment. He copied Gong Yimo and also took a piece of dessert for her to take a bite. He also wanted to snatch the dessert from her mouth. These desserts were designed very delicately. Each piece was only 2 small bites. Usually, Gong Yimo would eat 2 to 3 bites per piece. However, when Gong Dai put the dessert in her mouth, she ate it all in one big bite. She looked at him with a pair of proud eyes, meaning to see how he would snatch it. Her cheeks puffed up like a greedy little squirrel. However, her skin was sparkling and tender, even more tender than the snow jade cake she ate. Gong Dai was bewitched and lowered his head. He bit her lips and slightly rubbed, ambiguously and intermittently told her, "Since you won't give me the dessert, I can only eat you, royal sister." Gong Yimo was kissed by him. Her mouth was still puffing up and she couldn't speak. She even looked at him with a little grievance. It really made people want to eat her every moment. Gong Dai's heart was itching unbearably. Even Gong Yimo felt that he was suffocating. However, she took advantage of her injury and acted recklessly. She really wanted to take his life. Gong Dai felt that Wenhan couldn't bear to see this anymore. He just wanted to hug her and eat. When Bai Chio returned to the kitchen, he was still a little confused. He didn't expect that he would see such a scene when he entered. Even though Shang Mingshi's words prepared him, when he really saw it, he couldn't help but clench his hands and accidentally knocked over the bowl. How could she do this? Did she know what kind of person Prince Chi was to her? She was really shameless and inconsiderate. Bai Chio stared at the boiling medicinal pot in front of him and clenched his hands into fist. The scene just now was too dazzling. How could she do such a thing in public, in front of outsiders? Shame. Did she not know what shame was? Bai Chio suddenly thought of the way Gong Dai looked at him coldly. He had to admit that Gong Dai had power, influence, and good looks. So what? He was her blood relative. So what if he was good? Gong Yimo had once asked him if he wanted his scar removed. If he did, she could ask Sai Wuyen to make some muscle revitalizing ointment. At that time, he refused because he did not want her to go to Sai Wuyen for such a trivial matter. That Sai Wuyen was not a good person either. His eyes were always looking at her aggressively. It was obvious that he was up to no good. But now, as he touched this scar, he recalled the time when she had forced him to shave off his beard. When she had seen his true appearance for the first time, her eyes had flashed with amazement. He suddenly felt that if he did not have this scar, would she have looked at him a few more times? She would not have treated him as an ordinary friend, a dispensable person. If the person who hugged and kissed her in front of everyone was him, would he still feel that he was an eyesore? Would he still feel ashamed and unable to accept it? Bai Chio was shocked. He felt that he was really crazy. He had always been polite since he was young. Everyone said that he was rigid. How could he think of such a shameful thing? How could he think of kissing that woman? He hated women the most. But in his mind, he could not help but imagine that scene. He was hugging Gong Yimo, and Gong Yimo was limp in his arms with a pair of watery eyes. His mouth was inexplicably dry, and his whole body was numb. He fell into the fantasy and suddenly found it hard to extricate himself. If only he could replace Gong Dai. This thought made him feel ashamed. What was the difference between him and Sai Wuyen? But he was looking forward to it so much. The nervousness and desire in his heart almost overflowed. Gong Yimo said that she wanted him to be her boy toy. He was willing to do it. At this moment, he had completely forgotten that this was just a pretense used by Gong Yimo to save his father. He was a person who scrupulously followed etiquette, but now he was seriously considering the possibility of becoming her boy toy. Wasn't it normal for a princess to have a boy toy? At this moment, a female voice suddenly interrupted, "Gongzi, your medicine is burnt." Bai Chio was shocked to find that there was a woman standing beside him. He instinctively frowned and took 2 steps back. This was completely a subconscious action. He still hated women, but he did not realize it. Li Xiu was just reminding him out of kindness. Looking at the medicine pot, there was really a burnt smell. He quickly took the medicine pot down and said indifferently, "Thank you for reminding me." Li Xiu looked at him curiously. She recognized this person. He was the person beside the princess. He would take care of the princess's little monkey. Sometimes, he would also take care of His Majesty under the princess's orders. So she said casually, "I didn't expect His Highness's sweetheart to be the princess. Although their identities are hindered, they look really compatible." This sentence was like a thorn that pricked Bai Chio's heart and made him uncomfortable. The medicine he poured overflowed, making him frown even more irritably. Li Xiu did not seem to notice his abnormality and sighed, "I heard that close relatives can't have children. His Highness is such a good person, is he going to have no descendants?" Bai Chio was not a fool. This person had some thoughts about Gong Dai and was trying to provoke him. He would not be fooled. So he said angrily at once, "If Miss is interested in Prince Qi, you can go directly to Prince Qi. I think he might take you as his concubine to continue the family line." After saying that, he left with a sneer. Leaving Li Xiu on the spot, she stomped her feet angrily. She could not understand why those men were so protective of Gong Yimo. In her opinion, how good could a woman who did not even let her own brother go? She was just lucky. Not only did she have a good birth, she also had a good appearance. She was able to coax those men to surround her. Poor her. She fell in love with Prince Qi at first sight, but he did not even look at her. Why was there such a big gap between people? Li Xiu held her face and sighed faintly. On Gong Yimo's side, the two of them were so affectionate that they were almost full of snacks. Gong Yimo drank a mouthful of water and suddenly pulled down her face. "What's wrong?" Gong Dai asked anxiously when he saw that her expression was not right. "Bloated. I'm full." Gong Dai's originally frowned brows loosened. He was angry and amused at the same time, but his hand still subconsciously reached over and rubbed her stomach. She could not help but close her eyes and moan comfortably, just like a cat that exposed its belly for its owner to trample on. Her whole body was lazy. So this was how the royal sister looked like when she was in love. She was so cute. He wanted to take her home and pamper her. Chapter 497. At this moment, Gong Yimo smelled a special fragrance that came along with the warm autumn wind. It made her feel sleepy. Gong Dai carried Gong Yimo to the bed and prepared to sleep with her for a while. The two of them lay on the bed with their clothes on. Gong Dai pinched her face and touched her hair. Only when he was with her would his cold and dignified aura disappear, revealing the cleanness of his age and the coldness and gentleness that belonged only to him. The two of them had just confirmed their relationship, and it was a tense and curious time. Even if they didn't do anything and just chatted, they felt sweet. But after a while, Lo Chi suddenly came to look for Gong Dai. His expression was cold, and it was probably something urgent. Gong Yimo also said that she was sleepy and asked Gong Dai to go first while she slept. Gong Ju couldn't bear to part with her and planted a kiss on her forehead. Luo Qi pretended not to see anything and kept a straight face. "Wait for me to come back. I'll take you to eat." Gong Yimo directly held his face and kissed him deeply. Lo Chi could hear that ambiguous voice even when he turned around. But the two of them didn't care. It was just a goodbye kiss, but it sparked again. If Gong Yimo wasn't injured, she probably wouldn't be able to leave today. Lo Chi coughed softly. Gong Yimo then let go of Gong Dai and said with a red face, "Go ahead, I'll wait for you to come back." "Okay." Gong Dai stopped abusing the single person and kissed her one last time before leaving with Lo Chi. When Gong Dai left, The smile on Gong Yimo's face instantly disappeared and became cold. Spiritual master, you came from afar. Why don't you show yourself? She suddenly said to the window. Hey! The person obviously didn't expect Gong Yimo to find him, so he quickly appeared in Gong Yimo's room without alerting anyone outside. Gong Yimo looked at him seriously. Strictly speaking, she owed this person a favor. He was Qiu Xingfeng's master, the current head of Yunding Mountain, Wen Chan's spiritual master, Qiu Zhongchan. Little girl, you're not bad. He only glanced at Gong Yimo, but for her to be able to see his figure at such a young age, it really wasn't easy. Gong Yimo shook her head. Spiritual masters' martial arts are much stronger than the younger generation. The younger generation could find you because you have a strong smell of fire cloud grass on you. I see. Qiu Zhongchan suddenly understood. Qiu Zhongchan's meridians were naturally blocked, but he forced himself to practice martial arts, so he had to take medicine for a long time. The main ingredient was fire cloud grass, so it was not strange for him to have this smell on him. Qiu Zhongchan didn't think that it was the smell on his body that exposed him. That's right, he couldn't practice too strong martial arts, so he walked the soft path. The crafty steps was his most powerful skill. If he wanted to hide, unless it was someone with a higher level of martial arts than him, no one would be able to detect him. And the martial arts he practiced wasn't wind and nature, but another martial arts manual, Dark Sword Rain. With his current martial arts, he should be stronger than Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo sat up straight. Spiritual master, you sent someone to send Gong Dai away. Why are you looking for me? Qiu Zhongchan was stunned. He felt that this girl was really smart. She could even guess what he was doing. I'm looking for you because of the upcoming civil war in Yuqi. He said seriously, the civil war in Yuqi is a fight for power between the emperor and the empress dowager. It's an internal dispute. As a citizen of Daiyu State, you shouldn't be involved in it to prevent the situation from becoming more chaotic. Gong Yimo nodded seriously. Then as a citizen of Daiyu State, why are you here? Qiu Zhongchan was a little embarrassed. It's a private matter, so I can't tell you. Gong Yimo smiled. You're here because you don't want me to be involved. But from what I see, you're already involved. Why? He frowned. Gong Yimo pretended to be curious and asked, are the assassins who came to steal the girls not from Yunding Mountain? Although their status in Yunding Mountain isn't high, it's not low either. Qiu Zhongchan thought of something and his expression changed, but he didn't reveal anything. This is my private matter. I'll investigate it when I get back. If it's true, I'll punish them severely. Gong Yimo smiled. I'll definitely believe your words. But since you keep talking about your private matter, I can't help but think of the rumor that your wife is from Yuqi. Princess. His expression turned serious. Princess, you just have to promise not to be involved. After all, this is Yuqi's business. And Daiyu State has sent news that His Majesty already knows about Prince Qi's visit and is furious. This thing shouldn't be used in a war. It had to be said that Gong Yimo's efforts over the past few years were effective. Many people were starting to feel that a weapon like the bomb shouldn't be used in a war. Gong Yimo had expected Daiyu State's reaction. She said, how about this? If Yunding Mountain doesn't participate in this war, I won't be involved. How about that? He seemed to hesitate, but finally nodded. That's how it should be. Then, I won't disturb you any longer. Gong Yimo smiled. I won't see you out. Seeing Qiu Zhongchan leave, Gong Yimo was a little absent-minded. She actually wanted to ask him how Qiu Xingfeng was. After they parted, he never appeared again. He must have returned to Yunding Mountain. But on second thought, so what if she asked? Qiu Xingfeng wasn't anyone to her. She was the only one who remembered their friendship of more than 10 years. Cai Wuyan and the others acted quickly. They gathered their subordinates to counterattack. When the Empress Dowager saw that Cai Wuyan had appeared, she finally announced that she wanted to sign an agreement with Cai Wuyan. The agreement was simple. This war was a civil war in Yuqi. If Daiyu State interfered, Cai Wuyan would be removed from the throne. The Empress Dowager knew that Gong Yimo wouldn't give such a powerful thing to Cai Wuyan. So as long as Gong Yimo didn't interfere, it was still fair. Cai Wuyan was also afraid that he would bear the name of Daiyu State's puppet. Even if that wasn't the case, He still hated the word puppet. So he signed the agreement. Gong Yimo shook her head. She felt that it was a pity because there was a faster way to solve this. But after Sai Wuyen rejected her, she felt relieved. Things like this shouldn't be used on the battlefield unless it was absolutely necessary. Since they had already shed all pretense of cordiality, if they wanted to fight, then let them fight. Perhaps their strength wasn't equal before, but after the Empress Dowager's crushing defeat in the last war, the gap between the two forces was unknowingly pulled closer. For this war, she still favored Sai Wuyen. The war was on the verge of breaking out, but the people of Yuqi showed a very unfriendly side to Gong Yimo. Someone spread the news that Yuqi started the war because of Gong Yimo. Those who were rational and knew the situation were the minority. Most people thought that Yuqi would continue to live in peace, so they believed it. They came to blame Gong Yimo for appearing out of nowhere and intensifying the conflict. Chapter 498. Gradually, even the people of Snow City began to complain about Gong Yimo. Every day, many people would come to the governor's office to make trouble. They wanted the governor to expel Gong Yimo. Now that Sai Wuyen and Shang Mingxi were not around, they were busy preparing for war. How could they stay in Snow City? The governor was also in a difficult position. There was a demon living in his office. He did not dare to act rashly. He could only hope that these troublemakers would be careful and not offend the demon. If he was angry, he would blow up the governor's office. However, the more afraid something was, the more it would happen. Now that the military forces of Snow City had been transferred away, the ignorant people thought that there was no one in the governor's office. They did not know the fighting power of Gong Dai's subordinates, so they were bold enough to cause trouble. Moreover, this time, the trouble they caused was not small. They surrounded the governor's office and said that if the governor did not hand over Gong Yimo, they would burn down the governor's office. Now that the situation in the country was dangerous, the small people who usually did not dare to make a sound seemed to be stimulated by the tense atmosphere. One by one, they started to cause trouble. Hand over the princess of Daiyu State. People of Daiyu State, get out of Yuqi. Yuqi does not want to be a subordinate state. Daiyu State's conspiracy has succeeded. The princess of Daiyu State instigated a civil war. She is guilty of the most heinous crime. Come out and accept your death. The people shouted louder and louder. Fortunately, Gong Yimo did not hear them. Otherwise, it would be over. The governor had to explain the situation. This has nothing to do with the princess. The civil war will break out sooner or later. The princess is not to blame. Someone sneered. This is the Daiyu State's conspiracy. She has bewitched His Majesty. She wants to take over Yuqi and make it a subordinate state of Daiyu State. The governor saw that this person was an alarmist and quickly ordered people to arrest him. He shouted, "I don't accept this. This is the Daiyu State's conspiracy. As long as the princess of Daiyu State does not leave, the people of Yuqi will not be at ease." The governor waved his hand in annoyance. Take him away. However, it was useless to take one away. More and more people surrounded them. There were women and children among them. "Milord, my 3 sons have been transferred away by His Majesty. Yuqi was originally fine, why did he suddenly go to war? It was all the fault of this demoness from Daiyu State. Why are you helping the tyrant?" An old woman pulled at the governor and said angrily, "Milord, Yuqi and Daiyu State have no relationship. Now that we are going to war, the princess of Daiyu State should not stay in Yuqi. Make her leave. No. It would be better to burn such a demoness to death. Do you think our Yuqi is afraid of the Daiyu State?" All sorts of voices were heard. The governor was a little annoyed. He also knew that it was inappropriate for Gong Yimo to stay here, but did he dare to say anything? He might as well ignore them and let them do as they please. Initially, he thought that they would be fine after the ruckus. After all, they wouldn't be able to hear anything from the inner yard. However, he didn't expect that they would really set fire to the governor's mansion. Gong Yimo, who was in the inner yard, also knew about the fire. Gong Dai was the first to know that someone had set the mansion on fire. However, he didn't stop it because he didn't want to stay in Yuqi any longer. His Majesty had given him 3 secret edicts to return, so he had to take Royal Sister with him. Are the people of Yuchi causing a ruckus outside? Gong Yimo looked worried. It's fine. Gong Dai sneered. It's just someone instigating it. If Royal Sister is unhappy, I'll send someone to kill them all. He wasn't in the mood to find out who the instigator was. He'd just kill them all. Gong Yimo naturally wouldn't agree. She sighed faintly. It seems that I can't stay in Yuchi any longer. I originally wanted to wait for them to win the war before leaving. Gong Dai lowered his eyes. Many of the clans are dissatisfied with the Empress Dowager, so they didn't participate in this war. In addition, Sai Wuyan signed the agreement and won the hearts of many. He has a 70% chance of winning this war. It's still so low, Gong Yimo sighed. However, on second thought, it was good to go back. There was still an important matter in the country waiting for her to deal with. Her Majesty must be angry because she had given her virginity to Gong Dai. She still didn't know how to deal with it. She looked out the window and said faintly, "All right, let's go." Anyway, she had done what she had to do. The rest was up to fate. When the governor knew that Gong Yimo wanted to leave, he was a little troubled. He was afraid that he had offended her somehow. Gong Yimo said that it was the Emperor of Daiyu State who summoned her back. It had nothing to do with anything else. On one hand, the governor was glad that Gong Yimo wanted to leave. On the other hand, he was afraid of offending Gong Dai. In the end, he said a few words to persuade Gong Yimo to stay and personally sent Gong Yimo out. The fire was still burning and the crowd was still noisy. People of Daiyu State, get out of Yuchi. People of Daiyu State are sinister and vicious. Witch, get out of Yuchi. However, in the next second, they were slammed to the ground by a strong force. Gong Dai flicked his sleeves and suddenly appeared with Gong Yimo in his arms. In the light of the fire, he was dressed in black and looked like a demon from hell. If you want to die, you can continue. The royal sister didn't want him to kill people. Sure, he had plenty of ways to make these people suffer. Gong Yimo was in his arms and tugged at his clothes. There's no need to lower yourself to their level. Let's go. Only then did Gong Dai suppress his anger and leave. Although he couldn't do it when the royal sister was around, what about when the royal sister wasn't around? The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. He was seriously considering whether he should leave some people behind to teach these people in Snow City an unforgettable lesson. Perhaps it was because Gong Dai's murderous aura was too strong. Although he didn't make a move, they were terrified and didn't dare to act rashly. The group of people was as quiet as quails. They were angry but didn't dare to say anything. However, as the men in black appeared one by one behind Gong Dai, their murderous aura was obvious. Like a sword being unsheathed, their movements were neat and uniform. It was obvious that they were well trained. They didn't dare to act rashly. After all, they looked like they were going to leave. Since they had already achieved their goal, wouldn't they be courting death if they continued to cause trouble? Gong Dai originally wanted to ride with Gong Yimo, but Gong Yimo rejected him. She felt that it was better to keep a low profile when they were outside. Gong Dai didn't force her. The group of people ran through the night. The civil war in Yuchi also broke out after they left. Gong Yimo looked in the direction of Yuhua City. She could still hear the shouting. She heard that they had decided to fight on the plains outside Yuhua City. She wondered how the battle was going. However, she couldn't care less. Once the battle started, especially in a situation where both sides were evenly matched, it wouldn't end in a day or two. Since Sai Wuyan felt confident, she wouldn't interfere. At night, just as Gong Yimo was about to rest, a flying pigeon suddenly landed. Gong Yimo was quick to react. She snatched it from Gong Dai's hands and opened it. There were only 2 words on it. "Pingye, save me." She frowned. Could this be a secret message from Sai Wuyan? However, the battle had just started and it was impossible to tell who would win or lose. Why would he need her help? At this moment, she suddenly thought of the hidden enemy. Could it be that there were changes in the battle? Should she go back and take a look? Chapter 499. Something really happened to Sai Wuyan. In order to defeat him quickly, The Empress Dowager made all the soldiers take a drug that made them manic. Therefore, the battle was one-sided from the start. However, after taking the drug, there would be different degrees of side effects. Did the Empress Dowager not treat people as humans? Seeing Cai Wuyan's red eyes, Shang Mingxi made a prompt decision. Your Majesty, let's retreat. Their drug has a time limit. We just need to avoid the limelight. However, Cai Wuyan shook his head. We can't retreat. If we leave, they won't be able to vent the drug's effects. They'll definitely charge into the nearby towns and start a massacre. Then there's no other way. Shang Mingxi said coldly, if some commoners die, they'll only hate the Empress Dowager. This is to our advantage. However, if we stubbornly resist, we'll definitely lose. The commoners won't appreciate your kindness. Shang Mingxi thought that since people were going to die anyway, what was the difference between commoners and soldiers? There was still a difference. The commoners were unarmed and defenseless. If they retreated, these people would charge into the nearby towns and kill. Many people would die. Cai Wuyan was still hesitating. Your Majesty, although the other side only has 40,000 people and we have 60,000, these 60,000 people are all that we can mobilize. If the casualties are too great, there's no need to fight this battle. It's faster to just surrender. Don't hesitate. There were people dying in vain every second. Cai Wuyan suddenly raised his head. On the chariot, he gripped the railing tightly. He said in a low voice, soldiers die to protect the country. Their deaths are worthy. As the emperor, I'll live and die with them. Amidst the slaughter and flames, Cai Wuyan's excessively exquisite face actually showed a side of righteousness that inspired reverence. He couldn't retreat. If he retreated, he didn't know what kind of crazy things these crazy people would do. It was his responsibility to pacify the country. It was also his responsibility to protect the commoners. Dying for them was a worthy death. Shang Mingxi's originally tightly knitted brows gradually relaxed. He heaved a sigh of relief and lowered his head. In that case, Your Majesty, I will live and die with you. Cai Wuyan's expression changed. Finally, he forced a smile. Don't be like this. This isn't like you. If I accidentally lose and die, you can still rely on the Empress Dowager or anyone else. As long as you're willing, you'll definitely be able to live very well. Shang Mingxi couldn't help but laugh. Don't I look like one? But when I cooperated with Your Majesty and left with Your Majesty, I never thought that Your Majesty would be such a selfless person. The two of them looked at each other and smiled at the same time. This inexplicable friendship was inexplicably heartwarming. Cai Wuyan suddenly said, there's a person who said a long time ago that I would be a good emperor. If she were here, she would know that I would definitely do this. Shang Mingxi didn't answer. He looked at the battle and said, since we can't use force, we can only use our wits. Since you don't want to retreat, then let's fight. Cai Wuyan's eyes turned cold. Fight. Gong Yimo looked at the battle below and immediately discovered that there was something wrong with the Empress Dowager's people. She had never seen the leader of the Empress Dowager's camp. Although Cai Wuyan, Shang Mingxi, and the others repeatedly launched surprise attacks, the results weren't great. After all, the other party was like a madman and didn't give them any chance to breathe. Gong Dai, why don't we help them? Gong Dai saw her anxious expression and sighed slightly. If she really wanted Cai Wuyan to win, what did it matter? He nodded. Seeing Gong Yimo sigh in relief, he couldn't help but urge his horse forward. He touched her face. I'll bring people down. Don't run around. Gong Yimo's injuries hadn't fully recovered. He couldn't bear for her to take risks. Gong Yimo obediently rubbed against his palm. Go, I promise to stay here obediently. Gong Dai hid her and left behind a few people to protect her. Because they had rushed back through the night, in order to hasten their journey, he let more than 100 people go first and brought more than 200 people back. Now, he brought those 200 people to sneak into the battlefield. His movements were very light. It was obvious that he already had a plan. Gong Dai saw that the Empress Dowager's people were in a killing frenzy. He suddenly thought of a plan. He brought people to the back of the group and dragged out the corpses left behind by the Empress Dowager's camp. He then changed into their clothes and mixed into the Empress Dowager's people. After splitting up, he started a massacre. They were few in number. In a situation where they didn't need to use force, they could only take a risk. More than 200 people, split up among 40,000 people, and then suddenly slaughter the people around them. If these people still had reason, his plan would be very dangerous. If they weren't careful, they would be attacked by the people around them. But now that they didn't have any reason, his plan would only cause chaos among them. This way, it could be considered as indirectly helping Cai Wuyan and the rest. Gong Yimo was originally hiding in the dark and watching quietly. Suddenly, a strange fragrance wafted over. She pushed away the person protecting her beside her. Then, she used her sword to block the opponent's strange sword that came from the dark. When the two swords clashed, sparks flew out. The few people left behind by Gong Dai immediately became alert. They protected Gong Yimo behind them and found that there was only one person. Moreover, it was a bearded man who didn't look young. Zhenren, sneak attacking from behind is not a good habit. Qiu Zhongchen also used a light hidden sword. He smiled. You are very alert. In this world, there are not many people who can avoid my sword. He smiled. Suddenly, his expression changed and he said seriously, Princess, didn't you say that you won't interfere? Seems like you are prepared to break the agreement. Gong Yimo shook her head. I was prepared to leave. But someone called me for help, so I came back. Qiu Zhongchan said lightly, no matter what, a breach of the agreement is a breach of the agreement. I wonder if Gong Dai will obediently stop if I catch you. Now, Gong Dai had successfully caused chaos with his people. But he didn't bring many people with him, so he couldn't cause a big fight at the beginning. So, he continued to lead his people and killed everywhere like ghosts. Soon, the people in the Empress Dowager's camp found out that there was a mole among them, but it was dark and they were all excited. They didn't know who was the one who attacked them. Because of this, anyone who was close to them would be attacked. The chaos was getting worse and worse. Even Cai Wuyan noticed it. Shang Mingxi's eyes lit up. Opportunity. Your Majesty, surround them. Cai Wuyan nodded. Unconsciously, he cooperated with Gong Dai. The originally dangerous battle situation was turned upside down because of Gong Dai's team. Gong Dai only wanted to end the battle quickly. He didn't care if it was sinister or cruel. Since people were going to die, why couldn't they kill each other? Wasn't it just 40,000 people? If the Empress Dowager knew that Gong Dai used her to drug and did the opposite, making her shoot herself in the foot, would she die of anger? But it was also dangerous to go deep into the enemy's camp, especially when the Empress Dowager's people were so unstable. Gong Yimo didn't dare to distract Gong Dai, so she stopped the people who wanted to report to Gong Dai. Chapter 500. Catch me. Gong Yimo looked at her leg which was still bandaged. She could walk but she could not move for too long in case her injury reopened. Zhenren, don't you feel that you are taking advantage of me? Qiu Zhongchan had already raised his sword. Princess is smart and cunning. I, Qiu Zhongchan, can only take advantage of you. As he spoke, he thrust his sword towards Gong Yimo. His aura was strong and one could tell that his internal energy was very strong. Gong Yimo was injured and Qiu Zhongchan's martial arts were above hers. If it was under normal circumstances, Gong Yimo would not have a chance of winning. But as Qiu Zhongchan's blood vessels were not strong, he would not dare to use his full strength. Who would win and who would lose would depend on who was more ruthless. Once the two of them started fighting, no one could interfere. Gong Yimo did not allow them to look for Gong Dai, so they could only watch anxiously. Qiu Zhongchan fought a few times and his face suddenly changed. He stared at Gong Yimo's moves and the more he watched, the more shocked he was. In the end, he and Gong Yimo fought for a few hundred rounds before suddenly stopping. He asked sternly, why do you know our Yunding Mountain's martial arts? Wind and nature was created by my master. It is the secret of Yunding Mountain. Why do you know it? Gong Yimo retracted her hand. At this time, her foot was once again oozing blood, but she didn't seem to notice it. She slowly said, of course I know who created this. I also know that he is the world's first transcendent realm expert, capable of moving mountains and breaking rivers with a raise of his hand. In the end, because his wife had a strange illness, he brought her out to sea to seek treatment and never returned. Am I right? Qiuzhong-chan was even more shocked. Why do you know everything? Gong Yimo laughed coldly, because I was lucky enough to meet him once. At that time, his wife was sick and he brought her everywhere to seek treatment. When he met me, he saw that my talent was not bad and taught me this set of martial arts. Speaking of which, I am of the same generation as Junren. You can call me junior sister. Qiuzhong-chan was completely stunned. Then he shook his head. Impossible. You must have secretly learned our sect's martial arts. Ha, secretly learning? Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. Why don't you go and ask? I've been practicing martial arts since I was young, and I've already reached the limit of the 3rd level at the age of 10. At that time, I was in the Cold Palace. How could I go to Mount Yun Ding to secretly learn from him? Qiuzhong-chan's expression was conflicted. If she was really from his sect, and was of the same generation as him, then if he attacked her, would that be considered as fratricidal? Gong Yimo was also a little nervous. Her injury seemed to have split open. In this situation, she had to be careful. If Qiuzhong-chan was deceived by her and let her go, it would be fine. If not, she could only fight with her back to the river. The battle below was getting more and more intense. Although the two above had stopped fighting, their fighting spirit was not extinguished. They were ready to fight at any moment. The dry air brought with it a fishy smell. Gong Yimo took a deep breath. She suddenly felt that perhaps this power struggle would not take too long. It was very likely that it would be resolved tonight. If that's the case, Qiuzhong-chan felt that he could not attack Gong Yimo. Moreover, from the aura just now, Gong Yimo had already reached the 6th level of wind and nature at such a young age. He should not suppress such a talent, and she was also from Mount Yun Ding. Moreover, he could not use his full strength. It was also a problem whether he could take her down. But at this moment, a pigeon flew towards him. He caught it and opened the letter. His expression became even more conflicted. After a while, he sighed and said to Gong Yimo apologetically, I have no choice but to take you down. Sorry for the offense. He did not want to attack, but if he had to, he still had a chance of winning. After all, Gong Yimo was injured. The blood seeped out from the bottom of her foot. Her weakness was very obvious. Gong Yimo secretly took precautions. I think there's a better way to solve this. She smiled. That letter just now was from the Empress Dowager, right? The Empress Dowager is very angry about my return. Qiuzhong-chan nodded. You shouldn't have come back. Gong Yimo said casually, I also don't want to, but the Empress Dowager's style has changed greatly recently. She's full of schemes. Seems like there's an expert guiding her behind the scenes. Qiuzhong-chan did not speak. He only raised his sword. Princess, you should surrender. All right. Gong Yimo kept her sword. Didn't you want to bring me to see the Empress Dowager? Just lead the way. Princess. The guard left behind by Gong Dai shouted. His expression was full of disapproval. Gong Yimo said to him, the battle below is urgent. You are not allowed to distract Gong Dai. This is an order. After that, she said to Qiuzhong-chan lightly, let's go. She also wanted to see who the other party was. If Gong Yimo wanted to leave with Qiuzhong-chan, they would definitely not be able to stop them. Once Gong Yimo left, the few of them went to find Gong Dai. The reason was that they knew that if they did not listen to the prince would be unhappy and punish them. But if they listened to the prince would definitely kill them if he did not see them when he returned. The princess would never know what the prince's only request was for them to follow her. That was, the princess's safety was the most important thing. The princess's safety was the most important thing, including the prince himself. The Empress Dowager was furious. She smashed the utensils beside her and frightened the palace servants to kneel down. At this time, the army was said to be restrained. She was confident in her medicine and did not take it to heart. Instead, when she heard the news of Gong Yimo's return, she was furious. Good for you, Gong Yimo. Aijia was kind enough to let you live. Why did you have to come back to die? At this time, a woman stood beside her and whispered, I'm useless. I said I would force her to leave, but I didn't expect. She bit her lower lip and seemed to be ashamed. The Empress Dowager's expression softened. Wu Shi, how can you be blamed for this? Your plan worked. It's just that Gong Yimo is too cunning. She clearly said she wanted to leave, but she turned back. At this point, she gritted her teeth. The woman named Wu Shi was silent for a moment and suddenly said, later, senior brother will definitely bring Gong Yimo here. As long as Gong Yimo is here, Gong Dai will definitely not act rashly. And even if they do, they won't dare to use firearms. Rest assured, Empress Dowager. Dong Luani nodded, you've done well. If it weren't for you, Ijia wouldn't have known about Gong Yimo's return. Once the war is over, Ijia will reward you. Wu Shi smiled and agreed. Thank you, Empress Dowager, but the most important thing now is to control Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo is a cunning person. She must be obedient. She reminded the Empress Dowager. The Empress Dowager narrowed her eyes and thought for a moment, but did not say anything. Soon, Qiu Zhongchan came with Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo did not look at the Empress Dowager at first. Instead, she looked at the woman standing beside her. Once she saw her, Gong Yimo understood everything. This woman was Qiu Zhongchan's wife. At that time, Qiu Zhongchan accidentally lost his child and his wife fell out with him. Later, when he died, his wife appeared once so that he could hold her hand and repent. Chapter 501. Gong Yimo still remembered that when Qiu Zhongchan confessed, he was sincere, but this woman's face was indifferent, like an ice sculpture. So, why did she appear here now? Did she use Qiu Zhongchan's guilt to get him involved in this matter? Gong Yimo was sure that the note asking her to come back to save Empress Dowager must have been passed to her by this woman behind Empress Dowager and Qiu Zhongchan's back. Why did she do this? There was only one explanation. She wanted Empress Dowager and Qiu Zhongchan to misunderstand that she wanted to get involved in this matter. Thinking of this, Gong Yimo smiled and said to Empress Dowager, Empress Dowager, why did you invite me here? Dong Luani sneered, I want to ask you, didn't you not want to get involved in this matter? Why did you come back? Gong Yimo approached her, because, someone doesn't want me to leave. At this time, Wu Shi suddenly raised her head. She was good-looking, but her eyes revealed infinite coldness when she looked at Gong Yimo. Take her down. As soon as she spoke, Qiu Zhongchan moved. He was fast, but so was Gong Yimo. She ignored the wound on her foot and went directly to catch Empress Dowager. Qiu Zhongchan thought that she was going to harm Wu Shi, so he rushed to protect Wu Shi. Empress Dowager naturally fell into Gong Yimo's hands. Now, I think we can have a good talk. Gong Yimo breathed a sigh of relief and smiled lightly. Let go of Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager was not a fool. There were many people around her to protect her, but she underestimated Gong Yimo and Qiu Zhongchan's martial arts. She didn't know that the people in her room were not enough to defeat Qiu Zhongchan. Seeing Gong Yimo holding Empress Dowager hostage, Wu Shi's expression didn't change. She didn't come to help Empress Dowager. Originally, she wanted Empress Dowager to poison Gong Yimo, but Empress Dowager missed the opportunity, so she had to do it herself. But it was difficult to do it herself. Gong Yimo was in Snow City, and Snow City was under martial law. She couldn't do it, so she had to find a way to force Gong Yimo out of Snow City. But after Gong Yimo came out, she had Gong Dai by her side. She had no choice but to coax the Empress Dowager into poisoning the soldiers. Then, she sent a message to Gong Yimo, asking her to come back and save the people. Just as she had expected, Gong Yimo saw that the situation was urgent and sent Gong Dai to help Sai Wuyan, so she was left alone. This was why Qiu Zhongchan went to invite people. Now, there was only Gong Yimo left. Gong Yimo was no match for Qiu Zhongchan. She wanted to see who else could stop her. Dong Luani was a little flustered, but she was the Jade Qi Empress Dowager. Gong Yimo had committed a great taboo by killing her. It would be considered a disgrace to Yu Qi. Therefore, everyone in Yu Qi would definitely hunt her down to erase the shame of the country. She still wanted to do business and cooperate. There was no way she could do that. Therefore, the Empress Dowager had nothing to fear. Gong Yimo, you better let go of Ijia. Otherwise, Sai Wuyan will not be able to save you. Do you really think that Gong Dai has 200 people and can overturn the situation without using firearms? What a joke. This time, Ijia will win for sure. If you still want to cooperate with Yu Qi, you better put down your sword. Gong Yimo giggled. You still think that victory is in your hands because you don't understand Gong Dai. There was nothing he could not do, even if he was only 17. Dong Luani's expression changed and she suddenly said to Qiu Zhongchan, why aren't you taking her down? She felt that Qiu Zhongchan's martial arts must be higher than Gong Yimo. But what she did not expect was that Qiu Zhongchan did not move at all. He was the sect leader of Yunding Mountain and not Yu Qi Empress Dowager's subordinate. How could he listen to her? But the Empress Dowager was not someone to be trifled with. She had already prepared for this. Take her down, otherwise, your junior sister's life will be in danger. Wu Qi's expression changed. She told the Empress Dowager that she was Qiu Zhongchan's junior sister. She did not expect the Empress Dowager to use her to threaten Qiu Zhongchan. Could it be that she was poisoned? Qiu Zhongchan nervously touched Wu Qi's pulse and felt that it was normal. It did not seem like she was poisoned. The Empress Dowager coldly said, she was poisoned with a GU. If you don't save me, she will die a horrible death. Wu Qi's expression changed. You actually poisoned me with a GU. The GU in the Empress Dowager's hand was something she had tried to send to her. She originally hoped that the Empress Dowager would use the GU on Gong Yimo. She did not expect her to use it on herself. GU was different from other poisons. It needed a sound GU to activate the poison. It was a combination of GU and poison. Wu Qi thought of what kind of GU this was and its terrible consequences. She could not help but panic. Her expression changed. Qiu Zhongchan also realized that things were not simple. He coldly said to Gong Yimo, let go of the Empress Dowager. Gong Yimo calmly smacked her lips. What a great show. Was this a dog biting another dog? She held the Empress Dowager with her sword and looked unfriendly. You better not act rashly. I will kill people. Feeling a bloody mark on her neck, the Empress Dowager's face turned pale. You dare. Gong Yimo shook her head. I don't dare. But the Empress Dowager knew that her army was defeated and committed suicide in the palace. Is it reasonable? I think Sai Wuyan will definitely cover for me when he ascends the throne in the future. The Empress Dowager fiercely stared at her. You believe that Sai Wuyan can win? If Ijia wins, then you will be hunted down by Yu Qi. No. Gong Yimo vigilantly stared at Wu Qi, slightly curling her lips. I only believe in Gong Dai. The Empress Dowager choked, unable to refute. Wu Qi felt more and more uneasy. She gave Qiu Zhongchan a look. Kill them. Now that the situation was out of her control, the only thing left was to kill Gong Yimo. As for the GU poison in her body, she could only go back and think of a way. Gong Yimo suddenly said to the Empress Dowager, you have the mother GU in your body, right? Activate it. I want to see her face when the poison acts up. No. Wu Qi suddenly screamed. Qiu Zhongchan quickly raised his sword to kill Wu Qi. But at this moment, Wu Qi screamed and squatted down holding her head. That scream was so tragic that Qiu Zhongchan gave up on killing the Empress Dowager and rushed towards her. But who would have thought that just as he hugged Wu Qi raised her head and her eyes turned red. Her hand turned into a claw and directly pierced through Qiu Zhongchan's abdomen. At this moment, Gong Yimo realized that something was wrong. This GU poison could actually make people crazy, so she quickly said to the Empress Dowager, hurry and make her stop. Qiu Zhongchan had helped her before. She didn't know at first, but now that she knew, she definitely couldn't watch Qiu Zhongchan get killed, so she asked the Empress Dowager to stop. Who knew that the Empress Dowager's face was pale? After a while she stammered, Ijia can't make her stop. That is to say, once the GU poison is activated, it is irreversible. Gong Yimo didn't care about holding the Empress Dowager hostage and directly went forward to push Qiu Zhongchan away. But even so, Qiu Zhongchan was seriously injured. He sat on the ground and sealed a few of his acupuncture points before he recovered. Chapter 502. Gong Yimo couldn't help but stare at the woman in front of her seriously. This woman called Wu, she must have used her to get to the Empress Dowager's side. The Empress Dowager wanted her to leave, but Wu she tricked her to come back, making the Empress Dowager think that she went back on her words and wanted to interfere in the war. In anger, she used the Empress Dowager's hand to poison her. If the Empress Dowager didn't guard against this Wu Shi and poisoned her first, she would be in danger tonight. After all, Qiu Zhongchan was helping Wu Shi. She couldn't win against Qiu Zhongchan at all. At this time, Wu Shi couldn't recognize anyone. She attacked Gong Yimo like the manic soldiers outside. The only difference was that those soldiers still had reason, but she didn't. Her attacks were very ruthless, and she couldn't wait to tear Gong Yimo apart. Her martial arts were good, and with the help of the medicine, she was even more powerful. Gong Yimo didn't want to be entangled with her anymore and wanted to kill her directly, but Qiu Zhongchan begged in a low voice. "Princess, please spare her life. There must be an antidote for every poison. Princess, please seal her acupoints. I'll take her away." Gong Yimo was stunned. Although Wu she wanted to kill her, she was Qiu Zhongchan's wife after all. She was in a bit of a dilemma. And Wu she looked like she had lost her mind. She has lost her mind. This poison is very strong. She may not be cured. Gong Yimo's words were not unreasonable. Wu Shi's eyes were red and looked very ferocious. She was like a beast. And her attacks were indiscriminate. Qiu Zhongchan killed her without hesitation even though he saw her face. But Qiu Zhongchan didn't give up and tried to wake her up. "Wu Shi, wake up. You. Have you forgotten our daughter?" Wu Shi didn't stop her attack on Gong Yimo. Obviously, she couldn't hear what he said. Qiu Zhongchan covered his wound and looked sad. "Our family has just been reunited. Wake up. Let's go back to Yunding Mountain, okay? Whether it's Jianghu or politics, let's not get involved, okay? I will treat you and your mother well and use the rest of my life to compensate you." But Wu Shi still didn't respond. At this time, the Empress Dowager was watching from the side. The guards wanted to escort her away, but she didn't agree. She was not worried about the battlefield. There were still a few hours before the effects of the drug would wear off. That was enough time to defeat Cai Wuyan. The only thing she was worried about was the people in front of her. It would be best if both sides suffered losses, and then she could just sit back and reap the benefit. Gong Yimo was grabbed by Wu Qi a few times and she was furious. She sealed several major acupoints on Wu Shi's body, but it was useless. She was still attacking him in a frenzy, as if she had gone mad. If this continued, wouldn't it give the Empress Dowager an opportunity? Therefore, Gong Yimo made a prompt decision to knock her out. Who would have thought that knocking her out would be of no use? Instead, she found an opportunity to strike at him. Gong Yimo's pupils constricted. If she allowed her to succeed, she would definitely be seriously injured. Therefore, she really had no choice but to stab her sword, wanting to pierce through her palm. She didn't hold back this time. Although she was Qiu Zhongchan's wife, she was also someone who wanted to kill her. At this time, she could not kill her, but she had to cripple her. Who knew that when Qiu Zhongchan saw that Gong Yimo wanted to use her sword to break Wu Qi's palm, he used his heavy injuries to move forward. Not only did he flip over, he also blocked Wu Qi's aggressive palm. He also separated her and Gong Yimo. This was to protect Wu Qi, but Gong Yimo's aggressive sword could not be pulled back. Gong Yimo saw Qiu Zhongchan blocking in front of her and her face change. She didn't want to kill Qiu Zhongchan, so she had no choice but to move her sword at the last moment, stabbing Qiu Zhongchan's shoulder. Because she was caught off guard, she also suffered internal injuries. Her blood surged and there was a taste of blood in her throat. Although Gong Yimo managed to pull back in time, Wu Qi wouldn't. After her palm was blocked by Qiu Zhongchan, she didn't stop and hit Qiu Zhongchan's back again, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. His body also moved forward due to inertia, crashing into Gong Yimo's sword. What was originally a shallow sword directly pierced through him. And this scene landed in the eyes of Qiu Xingfeng, who rushed over. His eyes widened in disbelief. He was originally under his master's orders to bring his master's daughter home. He knew that his master was in the Jade Qi Palace, so he rushed over. He didn't expect to hear the sounds of fighting the moment he arrived. He rushed in and saw his master spitting out blood after being hit by a palm, and Gong Yimo's sword pierced through his master's body. The blood dripping from the sword made his eyes turn red in an instant. Master! Gong Yimo was shocked and quickly let go. But even so, her hands were still stained with Qiu Zhongchan's blood. She didn't do anything, but Qiu Xingfeng suddenly pushed her away and held Qiu Zhongchan in his arms. But Wu Qi didn't care who he was. Seeing Qiu Xingfeng holding Qiu Zhongchan, she didn't even think before attacking him. Gong Yimo was only slightly dazed before her body rushed over subconsciously. She used her hand to block Wu Qi's bloody claws and said to Qiu Xingfeng, "Take him away." Qiu Xingfeng saw that Qiu Zhongchan's breathing was weak and his hatred grew. He couldn't help but stare at Gong Yimo. "It's you again." He lowered his head and kept sending internal energy into Qiu Zhongchan's body. His entire body was shaking. Why? Why isn't it enough for you to kill my little disciple? You even want to kill my only master who was good to me. Qiu Xingfeng held Qiu Zhongchan as he knelt on the ground. He lowered his head and roared this sentence. Gong Yimo was stunned. And in this moment, Wu Qi hit her shoulder. But Gong Yimo was panicking and didn't feel any pain. Qiu Xingfeng's hands were also shaking. The internal energy he sent into Qiu Zhongchan's body was like a stone sinking into the ocean. His eyes were red. He was scared and hateful. He only felt that Gong Yimo was the nightmare of his life. Wherever she appeared, it was the blood of his loved ones. "Why don't you kill me too?" His voice was low and almost inaudible. But Gong Yimo heard it. Because of Qiu Xingfeng's words, her breathing became unstable and she couldn't speak. At this moment, Wu Qi hit Gong Yimo's chest and made her spit out a mouthful of blood. She was seriously injured this time. But Wu Qi didn't give her a chance to breathe. She attacked as if she didn't care about her life. And Qiu Xingfeng also realized that if this continued, Qiu Zhongchan would die. So he got up and left with Qiu Zhongchan. But before he left, he looked at Gong Yimo and his eyes were full of darkness. Coincidentally, Gong Yimo stepped back to avoid Wu Qi's attack. But when she stepped back, she suddenly felt pain in her shoulder. She lowered her head and saw a sword piercing through her body. In the next second, Qiu Xingfeng pulled out his sword and looked at her coldly. "I should have killed you. However, rather than saying this out of hatred, it would be better to say that he was annoyed. I should have killed you. Why can't I do it?" Chapter 503. Gong Yimo's body shook as she clutched her shoulder in disbelief. His sword was exactly the same as the one she had used to stab Qiu Zhongchan. Even the position and depth were the same. She couldn't help but laugh at herself. If her sword hadn't deviated, and had instead pierced Qiu Zhongchan's chest, would Qiu Xingfeng's sword have also pierced through her body? Wu Qi saw that Gong Yimo was heavily injured and directly clawed at her chest. It was as if she wanted to dig out Gong Yimo's heart. Gong Yimo was shocked by Qiu Xingfeng's sword. She looked at Wu Qi's fierce attack and didn't have the heart to avoid it. In a trance, she seemed to hear a loud noise, like a strong army. But the sound changed and became the soft murmurs of others. In the end, Wu Qi's ferocious face suddenly enlarged in front of her eyes. Gong Yimo suddenly closed her eyes and felt blood spraying on her face. Wu Qi screamed, almost to the point of wailing. Blood flowed down Gong Yimo's face, but she looked calm, as if she wasn't afraid of death. But Qiu Xingfeng didn't understand. When he saw Wu Qi attacking her, he should be happy. What he couldn't do, someone else did it for him. But when he saw Gong Yimo covering her wound and closing her eyes, he didn't even think and directly cut off Wu Qi's hand. He knew who Wu Qi was. She was his master's wife, so when he saw his master's wife slap him, although he hated it, he held back. He didn't know why, but when his master's wife wanted to hurt Gong Yimo, he couldn't bear it. Looking at the broken hand on the ground, Qiu Xingfeng didn't want to pay attention to this crazy mistress. Compared to his mistress, his master was more important. And he didn't want to face Gong Yimo, so he carried Qiu Zhongchan and left. Wu Qi hugged her hand and cried on the ground. Gong Yimo was stronger than her. After fighting for so long, She was already exhausted. Now that her hand was cut off, even if the drug was still there, her sore limbs couldn't support her to get up. It looked like both sides were hurt. Seeing this, the Empress Dowager burst into laughter. No matter how powerful Gong Dai was, she had captured Gong Yimo. Would Gong Dai not obediently surrender? Therefore, she gave her subordinate a pill and asked him to force Gong Yimo to take it. Now that Gong Yimo was seriously injured, she would definitely not put up any unnecessary resistance. At this time, if she took the pill to disperse her cultivation, there would be nothing to be afraid of. That person walked shakily to Gong Yimo's side, who was covered in blood. He wailed silently on the ground, but no one paid any attention to him. Meanwhile, Gong Yimo sat on the steps inside the hall, exhausted. She covered her wound and no one knew what she was thinking. The eunuch stammered, "Princess, please take the medicine. Now that the princess is seriously injured, it's better not to put up any resistance." Gong Yimo glanced at him and refused to let him feed her. She reached out and took the medicine from his hand. He opened his mouth, but his voice was extremely hoarse. "I'll take it." The Empress Dowager and everyone else watched as Gong Yimo took the medicine. She made the same mistake as Sai Wuyan. This medicine could not enter Gong Yimo's stomach. Seeing Gong Yimo take the medicine, the Empress Dowager sighed in relief. At this time, someone came with news that the situation was critical. It seemed that someone was helping the emperor, and that person was very powerful. He actually turned the situation around. When the Empress Dowager heard this, she frowned. But when she saw Gong Yimo, she smiled. Gong Dai valued Gong Yimo. If she used Gong Yimo as bait to threaten Gong Dai to exchange Sai Wuyan's head, would he dare to refuse? Thinking of this, the Empress Dowager smiled proudly. So what if Wu Shi was scheming? So what if Gong Dai turned the situation around? With Gong Yimo in her hands, she was the final winner. Now that Gong Yimo was harmless, she wanted to personally bring Gong Yimo to the battlefield to find Gong Dai to make a deal. That scene would definitely be very interesting. The main hall was quickly cleaned up, but Gong Yimo was still in a sorry state. Obviously, it was the Empress Dowager's intention. Finally, the Empress Dowager changed her clothes and led everyone out of the hall. When they came out, they found that the sky had just broken and the sky was filled with gorgeous colors. Although it was still dark, it was obvious that today would be a sunny day. Many ministers who supported the Empress Dowager had rushed over early. They were worried about the situation of the battle, so they waited outside the hall early in the morning. When they saw the Empress Dowager appear, they quickly knelt down. They did not see the bloody battle earlier. They only saw the Empress Dowager appear in high spirits, and behind her was a woman who was seriously injured and had blood all over her face. Someone could not help but say worriedly, "Empress Dowager, the situation in the open field is urgent, and the people are furious about the soldiers being poisoned. I'm afraid that Yuhua City cannot be defended. Why don't we retreat to Yang City, gather our troops there, and counterattack?" The Empress Dowager had more troops than Sai Wuyan. 60,000 was the limit that Sai Wuyan could mobilize in this short period of time, but the Empress Dowager had mobilized 70,000 troops. 70,000 against 60,000, although there was a chance of winning, it was not high. So she listened to Wu Shi's words and let 40,000 people take the drug that made them excited. First, these 40,000 people would be the vanguard, and then 30,000 people would be the backup. It could be said that victory was in her hands. Although she was schemed against by Wu Shi in the end, which led to Gong Dai turning back and intervening to overturn the situation, as long as Gong Yimo was in her hands, they would not lose this round. No need. The Empress Dowager looked at Gong Yimo with a cold smile. Since she dared to drug the soldiers, she was prepared to be hated by the people of Yuhua City. As long as she still had 30,000 normal soldiers in her hands, as long as she won today, what did it matter if the people hated her? She was still the Empress Dowager of Yu Qi, and after today, she would be the only person in power. With a wave of her hand, the palace servants brought Gong Yimo forward. But because the blood on Gong Yimo's face had dried up, the people could not see clearly. The Empress Dowager then asked someone to bring a basin of water over. A basin of water poured down on her head. Gong Yimo could not help but lower her head, But the Empress Dowager personally reached out and forced her to raise her head. She wanted the world to see just how pathetic Gong Yimo was. Droplets of water kept falling from her hair. Although her face was covered in blood, her eyes gradually became clearer. The first rays of the morning sun fell on Gong Yimo's face. At that moment, the sun just happened to rise, and the people could clearly see that the surroundings were lit up. Gong Yimo was also blinded by the first ray of light, as if she was not used to it. The people finally saw clearly that this woman was actually Gong Yimo. She was the blood sister of that terrifying man. Seeing the surprised gasps of the people, the Empress Dowager smiled proudly. As long as she is here, we will not lose. Yu Qi's world is still in Aijia's hands. When the people heard this, they all sighed in relief and laughed. They all praised the Empress Dowager's unparalleled wisdom. At this moment, the motionless Gong Yimo suddenly woke up. She reached out and wiped her face. Her hand was full of dried blood, and this wipe made her face even more hideous. She looked like an evil spirit. This action made the people suddenly quiet down. She was obviously a prisoner, but she slightly curved her lips, and her aura in an instant had an earth-shattering change. A gust of wind came, and the happiness on the people's faces froze, and the hairs on their backs stood up. They still did not understand the reason for this sudden chill, but they saw her standing up straight. If it was said that she was dispirited just now, like a numb puppet, but in this second, she was in a sorry state, as if she had been reborn. She suddenly looked at the Empress Dowager, and the Empress Dowager could not help but take a step back. Do you know? Gong Yimo's voice was still hoarse. She looked at the Empress Dowager, and then looked at the uneasy people below. Her face was covered in blood, and she laughed softly. In my heart, I only wanted to put down the butcher's knife and become a god, but there were countless people who forced me to become a demon. Chapter 504. The Empress Dowager had a bad premonition and quickly retreated. But it was too late. Gong Yimo casually reached out and grabbed her. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Before anyone could react, Gong Yimo smiled evilly and tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. I don't like how I used to be, but obviously, picking up a butcher's knife is the easiest thing for me to do. No matter how the Empress Dowager resisted, her hand was still tightly gripping her neck. The murderous aura around her was thick, as if she was a messenger from hell, calmly killing people who deserved to die in her hands. Princess, let the Empress Dowager go. At this moment, Guan Zijin squeezed out of the crowd and shouted, You said, you won't kill her. Gong Yimo looked at the panicking crowd and Guan Zijin, who was forcing himself to be calm. Her beautiful eyes narrowed and seemed to contain a bloody light. That faint murderous aura made one's hair stand on end. Yes, I won't kill her, but if she doesn't listen, I have many ways to make her live a life worse than death. As she said this, her fingers tightened, causing the Empress Dowager's face to turn red, but she had no strength to resist. Her hands drooped and veins popped out on her forehead. Princess! Guan Zijin panicked. The people around him were so scared that they didn't even dare to run. He was alone and could only kneel down. Princess, please let the Empress Dowager go. As long as Princess stops. I will do anything you want me to do. His kneeling made Gong Yimo frown slightly. You're really sincere towards her. Gong Yimo grabbed the Empress Dowager with one hand and pressed on her wound with the other. She had been quiet for so long because she was gathering strength. But she was still heavily injured and the wound on her leg had split open. She couldn't fight for a long time and had to end it quickly, so when she saw Guan Zijin, she suddenly had an idea and coldly glanced at the crowd. What about you? Resist me, or be like him and obey me, obey Emperor Yu Qi. As soon as he finished speaking, countless guards rushed in and surrounded the place. However, Gong Yimo was not afraid at all. She stared at the dozens of people dressed in official robes below. The pressure she felt was increasing. The Empress Dowager found that Gong Yimo didn't want her life. Obviously, she had some scruples. So at this time, when she heard that Gong Yimo was threatening everyone to rebel, she couldn't help but stare at Guan Zijin, but he didn't seem to see it. Gong Yimo was seriously injured. She hadn't made a move for so long, so she definitely didn't dare to kill her. So quickly take her down, capture her to threaten Gong Dai and kill the emperor. At that time, she would still be the Empress Dowager and the only person in charge of Yuchi. But Gong Yimo crushed all her hopes with one hand. She easily held the Empress Dowager hostage and walked down. The imperial bodyguards did not dare to act rashly and kept retreating. Therefore, Gong Yimo walked unimpeded to the side of a trembling official. When she passed by one of the imperial bodyguards, she sucked in the inner energy in her right hand and even took away his sword and held it in her hand. "Do you want to pledge your allegiance to the emperor?" She smiled and asked the official in front of her. But because she was covered in blood, her smile was so sinister that the official was so frightened that he fell to the ground. His whole body was trembling, but he still said firmly, You are just a princess of Daiyu state. You have no right to interfere in Yuchi's affairs." When Gong Yimo heard this, she didn't say much. She held the Empress Dowager hostage and then, under the Empress Dowager's terrified gaze, she raised the sword in her hand and slashed it down. In exchange, the other party screamed. It turned out that Gong Yimo had opened a wound on his body and blood was flowing out. What a fascinating color. Although she had put down the butcher's knife for a long time, it was still very easy for her to pick it up. She knew where to strike to get the effect she wanted. Just like this slash, it looked sinister and painful, but it avoided all the vital points. Amidst the screams, Gong Yimo's sword was pressed against his chin. His forehead was covered in cold sweat, but he didn't dare to make a sound. He looked at Gong Yimo as if he was looking at a demon. "I like that look in your eyes." Gong Yimo's gaze fell on his wound and she said softly, "This slash was just a polite greeting. You don't need me to greet you again, right?" The surrounding people were scared witless and no one dared to speak. Gong Yimo held the Empress Dowager in her hand like a protective amulet, preventing others from acting rashly. However, the sword in her hand was emitting an eerie chill. Bit by bit, it cut through everyone's nerves. "Pledge allegiance." "Your Excellency." It was a light sentence, but it was an ultimatum. The injured official couldn't take it anymore and knelt down while holding his wound. He hurriedly said, "Pledge allegiance, this official pledges allegiance to His Majesty." Gong Yimo's gaze faintly fell on another person. He was so scared that he knelt down, sweating profusely. "I also pledge allegiance to His Majesty. Pledge allegiance to His Majesty." At this moment, they didn't think too much. They just wanted to deal with the situation in front of them first. At this moment, someone couldn't take it anymore. He stood up and pointed at Gong Yimo angrily. "Are you going to tolerate a woman from Daiyu state acting so arrogantly? Someone come. Kill her. Don't you care about the Empress Dowager's life?" Someone shouted softly. That person retorted sarcastically, "The Empress Dowager sacrificed her life for the country. I'm sure the Empress Dowager won't tolerate someone using her as a shield to coerce a virtuous person." Gong Yimo laughed. She saw the Empress Dowager's eyes darting around and she was clearly afraid. So what if the Empress Dowager died? There was still the little prince. Although they were the Empress Dowager's people, when the Empress Dowager couldn't protect them, they thought of fighting for their own lives. Perhaps, the Empress Dowager's death was a good thing. However, how could Guan Zijin allow such a thing to happen? The Imperial Guards obeyed his orders and didn't move. Instead, it was Gong Yimo who said faintly, "This person seems to be disloyal. Guan Zijin, why aren't you taking him down?" Gong Yimo's threat woke Guan Zijin up from his dream. He glanced at the Empress Dowager and ordered the Imperial Guards to arrest that person. At this moment, that person realized that he was afraid, but he still shouted loudly, "Commander Guan, are you crazy? How can you tolerate this demoness insulting me like this?" "I'm not crazy. I just don't want you to kill the Empress Dowager." Guan Zijin had already thought it through. Now that the war was going on and the Empress Dowager was captured, if he listened to Gong Yimo, perhaps Gong Yimo would really let the Empress Dowager live. Gong Yimo was very satisfied with his understanding of the situation. She walked step by step to the person who was captured. "You disobeyed the Emperor and now you don't care about the Empress Dowager's life. Does this mean that you're on the little prince's side?" You're very ambitious. I like it. Gong Yimo smiled, but the sword in her hand slowly slid down from the person's shoulder. The tip of the sword went into his flesh. In exchange, he screamed. Chapter 505. Fortunately, he was fat, so this depth wouldn't kill him, but it would make him scream continuously. As the sword slashed downwards, blood flowed out. His cries became more and more shrill, making one's scalp tingle. The entire courtyard was dead silent. Everyone was in danger. In the end, the miserable shriek stopped abruptly. He fainted. Gong Yimo swung her sword and blood splattered on the ground. She glanced at the crowd and asked casually, "Who else is disobedient? Who would dare to disobey?" Everyone immediately knelt down and kowtowed to show their loyalty. Although their hearts were filled with hatred and unwillingness, on the surface, they wished they could lick Gong Yimo's feet. Gong Yimo smiled. "Since you've submitted, to show your loyalty, hand over your official seals." Many people hesitated. A person's official seal was also a private seal, just like an emperor's imperial jade seal. How could they hand it over so easily? Gong Yimo looked at them coldly. "When the emperor returns, show your sincerity and go to him to exchange for the official seal. Such a good opportunity to show your loyalty was given to you. You don't seem to be satisfied." This implied threat made them no longer hesitate and hand over their official seals. With this, they could be considered to have completely betrayed them. When the Empress Dowager saw that these people who claimed to be loyal to her had turned to Gong Yimo so easily in the end, she was filled with hatred. She straightened her neck and spoke intermittently. "If Sai Wuyen is dead, what if Sai Wuyen died?" Sai Wuyen was defeated and killed, and Gong Yimo had completely offended her. Were they not afraid of Yu Qi's revenge? Hearing this, Gong Yimo admired her distorted face up close. Finally, he suddenly let go of her. The sudden burst of air caused Dong Luani to fall to the ground and cough uncontrollably. Guan Zijin hurriedly went over to help her catch her breath. In the next second, Gong Yimo pointed her sword at the two of them. At such a close distance, they didn't dare to act rashly because Gong Yimo could easily take care of them. Dong Luani glared fiercely at Gong Yimo as she coughed. She couldn't understand why Gong Yimo wasn't poisoned. She had clearly seen her swallow that poison. Guan Zijin knelt on the ground to protect Dong Luani, and he looked at Gong Yimo as he said seriously, "Princess, don't you think that your actions are too absolute? If Sai Wuyen dies, Yu Qi will still be inseparable from the Empress Dowager. Now that Princess has placed all your bets on Sai Wuyen, aren't you afraid that you will lose everything and become the enemy of Yu Qi?" Gong Yimo was standing in front of them, but at this moment, she was looking down at them like a tall mountain that they could not look up to. With Gong Dai around, even if Sai Wuyen loses, he won't die. Dong Luani felt better, but when she heard what Gong Yimo said, she glared at Gong Yimo fiercely and said resentfully, "What if Gong Dai dies too? You trust Sai Wuyen so much, isn't it because you trust Gong Dai? What if Gong Dai dies too? What right do you have to stand here?" Gong Yimo suddenly smiled. The morning light became brighter and brighter, shining on her as she straightened her back. But her words seemed to come from the depths of hell, making people shudder. "If Gong Dai dies, I want the whole of Yu Qi to be buried with him." Dong Luani was shocked at first, then she sneered and wanted to mock her for being ignorant. But when she looked up, she saw that her eyes were serious, and behind those serious eyes was a chilling murderous intent. It seemed to come from the ends of the earth, but also from hell. "I'm serious," Gong Yimo added with a smile. Her attitude was cold and casual, but there were so many people present, and no one dared to refute her. Even though Gong Yimo was in a sorry state, even though she was seriously injured, they inexplicably believed that if Gong Dai died in Yu Qi, she would make Yu Qi disappear from the world. She was serious. What they didn't know was that it wasn't like she had never done something like destroying a country. In a trance, they looked at Gong Yimo, as if they had a strange feeling. That was a woman standing on the peak of a mountain. She was holding a willow dew that could save the world in her left hand, and a bloody machete in her right hand. Whether she was a saint or a demon, it was as if she had no boundaries. She could have a bottom line, but she could also have no bottom line. They suddenly remembered that the terrifying man was also raised by this woman in front of them. So, wasn't she more terrifying than that man? Suddenly, there was a commotion outside. The sound was getting closer and closer, as if someone was cheering. Gong Yimo was a little tired. She slowly squatted down and looked at the Empress Dowager. Guan Zijin was afraid that she would hurt the Empress Dowager, so he shielded the Empress Dowager behind him. Unexpectedly, Gong Yimo only yawned lazily. Empress Dowager, let's make one last bet. She liked to bet, and she never lost. Let's bet. Gong Yimo looked at the door of the courtyard. Let's bet on who will be the first to appear there. How could Dong Luani be in the mood to bet with her? If the person who appeared there was her subordinate who came to deliver the good news, then Gong Yimo would be dead. What she had done just now was enough for her to be sentenced to death by 1,000 cuts. Moreover, the Daiyu State's emperor would not be able to say a word. So what if her martial arts were strong? She would never be able to leave Yu Qi alive, unless she used firearms in exchange. However, if the person who appeared there was Sai Wuyan, then there was no need to think about it anymore. The situation was hopeless. However, even if they defeated the 40,000 soldiers, it wouldn't be that easy to break through Yuhua City, right? After all, it had only been one night, and dawn had just broken. Yuhua City was impregnable, so how could it be Sai Wuyan? The Empress Dowager was hoping for a fluke, but she was afraid and hopeful at the same time. Her fingers clutched her gorgeous dress as she sat on the ground, as if she was falling from the clouds and clutching at the last straw. She hoped that it was one of her own people, so that they could trample Gong Yimo into the mud. She shouldn't have poisoned Gong Yimo. She should have chopped off her limbs the moment she was exhausted, and not fed her poison. However, it didn't matter. As long as it was one of her people, she would never make such a mistake again. You bet that the person who came was one of your subordinates? Gong Yimo asked lazily as she squatted with one hand holding her sword and the other supporting her cheek. It was fine if the Empress Dowager didn't answer. She continued to speak. Then I bet that the person who came was Royal Sister. Hearing Gong Dai's voice, Gong Yimo immediately stood up. She had never thought that she would miss Gong Dai so much. They had only been apart for a few hours, but it was a matter of life and death. Every step she took left a bright red mark on the bluestone tiles. This was something that no one else noticed. Only Gong Dai noticed that the wound on her leg had split open. His heart ached so much that it felt like it was going to split open. He quickly went forward and caught Gong Yimo, who rushed over like a swallow returning to the forest. The moment he hugged her, he suddenly felt a lump in his throat. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.